Sweep Me Off My Feet by J.A. Fielding. A romancely.com story. A Marriage of Convenience, BWWM, billionaire romance novel.
Prologue. Angela Carter had always been one to follow whatever the weatherman said. If he said to bring an umbrella, she would do exactly that, even if there was no cloud in the sky, and walking around town with an umbrella made her seem ridiculous. For her, it was about following the rules. If there was a hurricane warning, she was the first one to barricade her windows and secure her furniture. Her following the rules was something she learned as a child, a behavior drilled into her mind thanks to the upbringing she had. But somehow, everything she had ever learned seemed to go right out the window when she met him. He was the kind of man who sent chills down your spine. She could still remember the first time they met. Everything about him screamed, bad idea. From the good looks donned in perfect flashy jewelry to the way he ordered bottle service as if his life depended on it. She was not of his world. All she could do was brush shoulders with people in that world. She did not know what it was about him that threw her off balance. Whatever it was, she just could not wrap her head around it, and it just drove her nuts. In a good way at first, but now all she felt was anxious, especially when he was around his friends. It was like having a different kind of thrill. She never knew what it was about him when he was around his peers. It was like he completely changed to become this new version that she was still to come to terms with. On that late Thursday evening, she had finally decided to swallow every negative feeling she had and just let him know what had been going on. After all, how long could she keep it secret anyway? It was bound to come out. He was bound to find out sooner rather than later. She shivered lightly when she felt the crisp air brush against her skin. This was the one day the weatherman had been wrong about his prediction. It was supposed to be a significantly warm day, and for that reason, she had on a light fabric jacket over a vest. The jacket was more of a fashionable thing more than warmth really, but she was beginning to wish she had gone for a jersey instead. Even in the car she was waiting in, she was not really feeling warm, and she kept on wondering what was taking him that long. She had been waiting for a long while really. It was now going to half an hour, and she was just too far to determine if he was almost done with his friends or not. But even though it had been a long time, she had still not had enough time to figure out how she was going to let him know about the secret she had been keeping. She looked up for the millionth time, but this time, she saw him running towards the car. Fast. She felt her heart suddenly begin to race. He almost fell over as he slid over the hood of the car before he got in. She would have found that silly move cool if she was not so freaked out. She was calling him, asking for an explanation, but he wouldn't give it to her. Instead, all he was doing was racing down the streets, maneuvering the corners as if their lives depended on it, and until a few seconds later, Angela found out that their lives did actually depend on his driving. She screamed when she felt something hit them, making him swerve. She screamed and held on for dear life as he took a sharp turn, getting them out of the way of the car on their tail. Angela was panting. She could see the other car racing down the parallel street in a bid to catch up to them. She did not know whether the bullets were meant to slow them down or just stop them. Whatever it was, she was scared. She put a hand on her tummy as she cursed the day, silently wishing she had told him about the baby before this whole mess. At that moment, she was just sure she was not going to get out of that car alive, and that no one would ever know that there was a child involved in that crime. Damn it, Angela. You should have said something. There is no way he would have allowed a baby, his baby, to be in this kind of danger, she thought. But it was too late for regret. It was too late for what-ifs. All she could do was close her eyes and pray for her soul.
Chapter 1. Angela Carter's eyes fluttered open, and she sighed loudly when she realized the kids' noise in the room were not part of her dream but her son, Brandon, who was trying hard to wake her up. This was what he usually did every single morning without fail. It was a little frustrating, especially on mornings like these ones when she just really needed those extra 20 minutes before her alarm went off, but she could not imagine her life without Brandon, even though he came into her life a little earlier than she would have planned for it. "Good morning, Mama's little man," she said as she reached for him and pulled him up. She kissed his chubby cheeks and then planted one more kiss on his forehead. "How are you doing?" she asked. "Good, but I'm hungry, Mama." I want breakfast. Oh, my little monkey is hungry, isn't he? She said, tickling him tummy, sending him into fits of giggles. Did you brush your teeth? He nodded, and she frowned. No, you didn't. Brandon smiled at her guiltily. No, I didn't. Well, then go ahead and get those teeth brushed. I'll get your breakfast ready, all right, baby? Yes, Mummy. She kissed him again before he jumped out of her bed, leaving her alone in her bed. At only 22 years of age, Angela was doing more than most people did in their 40s. Her 4-year-old son was her world, and she did anything and everything she could to make sure she provided for him, but even though she worked crazy hours at her job, she hardly made enough to get by. She was paid a little more than standard minimum wage, but even then she found that what came in was a lot less than what she needed for her rent, utilities, and a sitter. Things had recently become a lot better with her managerial position, but unfortunately, she was not working in a Fortune 500, so her new title did very little for her bank account. Sometimes, she even felt like she put in a whole lot more into her job now than before when she was just stocking the shelves. She sighed softly when she caught a glimpse of the stack of bills she had yet to go through. She had neatly packed them away in the kitchen, and every single time she began feeling overwhelmed, she would consider making that dreaded call to Brandon's father, but again, every time that thought would cross her mind, she shuddered. It had been almost 5 years since she had seen or spoken to Brandon's father. Matter of fact, he was more of a donor than a father. It took a lot to be a father, and she could not even dignify him with the honor of being called a father. Not even if it meant her and her son having beans on toast to survive, because if that is what it took, then that was what she was going to do. She rubbed the side of her temple to soothe an itch as she stirred the oatmeal she was preparing for Brandon, reminiscing on how things were before. It was not always like this. It was a little different back then. Back when she met Brandon's father, Donor. She was much younger than she was now. An innocent high school girl who happened to be looking for love in all the wrong places. Angela Carter was a talented student at McKinley High School. Her high IQ coupled with her talents in debate and performing arts were unrivaled. But the biggest disadvantage was her background. She might have been a talented student, but she was also scarred from growing up in the foster system. As it was, she was one of the few people who fit the stereotype. An African-American girl who grew up in the foster system under the care of a guardian who was only doing the job for the allowance. Perhaps it was that factor that led her to look for the attention she never got out in the streets or the company she kept in school. She was not really sure. All she knew was that at 16 years of age, she thought she found the man of her dreams. A young, good-looking man who had no problem spending money on her and making her feel like she was the only woman in the world. For the first time in her life, everything was good. Everything was as it should have been. It felt good being wanted, being needed. It did not take long for her to make him the center of her universe. Everything that happened in her life was all about him. She was a little disappointed when she found out what he did for a living. He was one of the people who was fueling one of America's biggest problem, drugs, but he also assured her that he was just a businessman. "This is what I do, baby. It is not who I am," he had told her, looking right into her eyes. "Do you know how many kids I saw overdose while in foster care? Hundreds," she pleaded her case. "I never use my own product." Angela shrugged. "That is what everyone says." "Well, a lot of people might say it, Angie, but I actually mean it. The first and greatest mistake you would make in my business is to get high on your own supply. You get started that way and I guarantee that your business will be over in less than a few weeks. 2 months tops." Angela looked into his eyes. "It is not just about you using it that has me worried, Deshawn." He slipped an arm around her waist and pulled her close. "What is it, Angie?" "What is it that has you all knotted up inside that pretty little head?" he asked as he looked down at her. The look in his eyes was more than simply inquisitive. It was also lustful and, as far as she was concerned, fucking hot. She looked at him and shrugged. "You are fueling a problem. And then there is the whole safety issue." He pressed a finger to her lips. "You are worried about me." He smiled. "That's sweet. Don't do that. Don't try to be cute about the fact that I am worried about you," she pointed out. "That line of work is dangerous, babe. I don't want to wake up one day and find out that I lost you to some crackhead who is just pissed off he didn't get his next fix for free. I am fine. I don't use my product." "What about the cops?" she asked. "Should I walk around watching my every step because I might randomly get searched in the street?" Her voice trailed off when he kissed her. "Angie, you are my entire world and you have to believe me that I would never let anything happen to you," he said. "It wouldn't be up to you. The way these things work." She shook her head and he kissed her again. "Believe me, I will always come back to you." She was too young to know it at the time, but they were just words. He never meant anything he said to her. Matter of fact, he had probably the same words to different girls a number of times. She was just another silly girl who believed him. His latest conquest. At the time, they were living the dream, at least from Angela's point of view. It was all about glamour and crime, like a reenactment of Bonnie and Clyde, and she thought that it was always going to be like this. But everything changed when she told him that she was carrying his child. It should have been an unforgettable moment, the day he learned about his next generation, but like so many other men, he just loved being with a young girl who knew nothing about life. But when shit got real, he showed his true self. He had urged her to give the baby away, and that way, nothing would have changed. "What do you mean that nothing is going to change?" she had asked. "The life we live is not one that we should be bringing children into. We can give the kid up for adoption," he tried to say before she put a hand up, stopping him mid-sentence. "You want me to give up our child?" "My child?" she asked. "After all those stories I have told you about my own life? How much being in the foster system can fuck you up?" "I don't know what to tell you, Angie, but if you have this baby, then we will be over." His words cut her deeper than any blade ever could, but even then, she could not let him get away with it. She was not going to give up an innocent baby into a wild system that she only knew too well, even if it meant losing him. It was hard to believe that someone she had entrusted her life and heart to could ever be capable of those words. Such cruelty coming from the same person who had promised her the world, it was hard to believe that he could be this heartless. He had told her over and over that she was his queen, but when the rubber met the road, he walked out on her, leaving a timid 17-year-old pregnant with no idea how she would move forward. For Angela, she only had one choice, really, to grow up, and grow up she did. She got a job at a retail store and got a cheap one-bedroom in a good neighborhood. She might have paid a whole lot less in some other parts of town, but security was important to her. And even though the apartment was smaller than she would have wanted, she took pride in the fact that it was more than she or most kids had growing up. Her son had the bedroom and she slept in the pull-out couch in the living room. Well, more often than not, she shared the bed with Brandon, especially when he was younger, but again, she did not mind it. She had just poured the cooked oatmeal into 2 bowls when Brandon came running in excitedly. "Slow down, mister," she said as she picked him up and set him in his chair. "Someone gets a big star for brushing his teeth all by himself." "Will you stick it on the fridge?" he asked excitedly, and she nodded. "Of course I will, but after you have cleared your bowl." She topped up his oatmeal with some fruit and then handed him a spoon before she grabbed herself a spoon and took a bite of her own oatmeal as she looked at him. She could not believe how big he was getting. Sometimes, she felt like she blinked and he was suddenly all grown up. She might have had a hard time raising him all by herself, but she was doing everything she could to give him a normal childhood. "Mama?" Brandon said, making her snap back into reality. "Yes, baby?" "Where's my daddy?" he asked, and she felt her heart sink. She had tried keeping the truth from him for as long as she could, but she always knew that this day would come. The day her son would ask about his father. "Well, sweetie, your daddy," she started before her voice trailed off. She might have thought about the day Brandon would bring this up, but she had always hoped it was going to be much later in life because at that moment, she had no idea how she was supposed to answer him. "Baby, families are different," she started again. "Some kids have a mummy and a daddy. Some have two daddies, others have two mummies, and some very special kids have just one mummy like you, and others have just one daddy." She looked into his eyes hoping that her long explanation had helped, but all she could see was just more and more confusion. "Why?" he suddenly asked, and she shrugged. "What do you mean why? Why do some kids have just one daddy? Or just one mummy?" he pressed, and she sighed loudly. Her son was just too inquisitive for his own good. This was a quality that was going to help him once he started school, but at that particular moment, all his questions did was upset her. She knew that there was nothing she could tell him that would make him understand. He was too young to wrap his little mind around the dynamics of life. He had a long way to go before he ever understood the concept of deadbeat dads. "Well, Brandon," Angela started again, praying to God that she would find the right words to explain herself to him. "Some mummies have to work a lot more than daddies, and some daddies have to work a lot too. So, if they have a lot of work to do, then they can't come home. So, that is why I have not seen my daddy, Mama? Because he is working?" Angela forced a smile and nodded. She hated having to lie to him, but this was the only way she knew how to protect his innocence. "When is he going to finish the work so I can play with him?" Brandon was relentless. Angela shook her head. "I don't know, baby. Now eat up." She took a bite of her own oatmeal as she watched him. She could not help but wonder what had brought that conversation on. She had tried everything to make sure he never had to handle that topic for a long time. If it were up to her, she would never have wanted him to know about his father. About what a disappointment he was. Every time she thought of how she had to sometimes choose between being late with the rent or keeping the apartment warm while Deshaun was probably somewhere throwing money at a strip club, she felt sick to her stomach. Sick that she had allowed him to take advantage of her. Sick that she had been too blind to see who he really was and what he was really like. "Don't think about that right now," she thought to herself. Nothing good can come of rehashing the past. It had been almost 5 years since she last spoke to Deshaun, and though it had been a bit of a struggle, she had been all right so far. After breakfast, she spent some time with Brandon on the floor playing doctor. As usual, he was Dr. Brandon Carter and she was his ever-suffering patient. She might have been having a good time with her son, but the unpaid bills she had seen on the counter earlier, wondering if picking up some extra shifts was going to cut it. She then cleaned up the apartment before she got ready for work and then got Brandon ready to drop him to a daycare around the corner. It was not the best, but it was all she could afford on what she got from the retail store. "It does get better," she thought as she made her way down the stairs with Brandon's small hand in hers. This was the mantra she chanted to herself every time she felt like she was about to give up. For some reason, reminding herself that everything would get better always seemed to work for her.
If you want more BWWM romances like this, please my love, be sure to subscribe to the Romancely YouTube channel. I look forward to spending more time with you. Subscribe and let's make it happen. Chapter 2. Angela was excited when she woke up the next morning. It was one of those rare days she had managed to get some time off, and what was even more perfect about that particular Sunday morning was the fact that her best friend, Candy, was coming over. Candy had been the one constant in Angela's roller coaster life, and every time she got to spend some time with her, even if it was just a short while, it was pure bliss. On that particular day, Candy was actually going to be there for the better part of the day, and going by past interactions, it was very possible that Candy was going to be sleeping over or at least leave very, very late. After having a quick shower, Angela held her curly hair in a bun and put on a pair of tights and a V-neck t-shirt before she sat down to watch some TV as she sipped on the pineapple banana smoothie she had prepared for breakfast. She was usually never in a hurry to wake up Brandon on Sundays that she was supposed to stay home. She usually just let him sleep in and run his clock out, and that morning was no different. It was not until 9 when Brandon got out of bed and came to cuddle in his mother's lap. "Good morning, my angel," Angela said as she held him. "Are you hungry?" Brandon shook his head. "Why don't you go and get out of your PJs, and then I will be right in to help you make the bed. Okay?" she asked a still groggy Brandon, who nodded. She took one more sip of her smoothie before she put her glass down and walked to the bedroom. She got Brandon a change of clothes and helped him brush his teeth before they made the bed together. Well, it was more of her making the bed and him tugging on one end like his life depended on it. She could tell that he was proud of himself as they walked out of the bedroom. "Do you want some of Mama's smoothie?" she asked, and he frowned. "No. What did we say about breakfast, honey?" she asked as she looked into his eyes. "It is the most important meal of the day," he said, and she nodded. "Good. Then you need to have some smoothie." His shoulders drooped, and she gently stroked his big fro before he walked over to where she was sitting earlier and had a few sips of her smoothie before he looked up. "Now can I have some Cheerios?" he asked, and she smiled. She loved how he always seemed to find a way to get exactly what he wanted. "Not yet. Have a little more, and then maybe I will think about giving you some Cheerios." Brandon opened his mouth to protest, but he did not get a chance. They both turned their attention to the door when they heard a soft knock on the door. "I'll get it," Brandon said, racing to the door, but Angela caught his hand before he could run past her. "No, mister. A few more sips or I get you your own cup. The big cup too." Brandon frowned. "The one I don't like?" he asked, and she nodded, smiling. "The very one." Her grin grew wider as he walked back to the table, grumbling. She was still smiling when she walked to the door and opened it to find her best friend, Candy, standing at the door holding what looked like shopping bags and a pizza. As usual, she looked like a socialite who had just been dropped off at her door from Milan Fashion Week in her stilettos and Daisy Dukes that made her legs look even longer than they were, and a crop top that showed off her toned abs. Her entire outfit was meant to show off her perfect figure, and that was exactly what it did. "Hey you," Candy said cheerfully. "Is that a pizza?" Angela asked, smiling. Candy looked at the box in her hands and nodded. "Yes, of course." "It is 8 in the morning," Angela said matter-of-factly. "Yes, and there is never a bad time for a pizza," Candy replied as she leaned in to kiss Angela's cheek. "Aunt Candy," Brandon said excitedly as he got up. "There's my favorite little boy," Candy said as she walked into the apartment. Angela took the pizza box and shopping bags from her before Brandon jumped into her arms. "How are you doing?" She pulled away and looked into his doe eyes. "Mama's making me take her smoothie," he lamented as Angela closed the door. "It is healthy for you," Angela said as she walked towards them. "Don't you want to have big, strong muscles? Like Captain America?" Brandon asked, and Angela nodded. "Yeah, like Captain America." He nodded. "Well, he drinks a lot of fruit smoothies and eats his vegetables too," Angela said as she looked at them. "Do you know what else Captain America ate?" Candy asked, and Brandon shook his head. "Pizza." Brandon's eyes lit up. "For breakfast?" he asked as he looked at Candy, who was nodding. "Yeah, I got that weird pineapple and ham thing you like and a chicken teriyaki with extra cheese for me and your mama." She turned around and got the pizza from Angela. Brandon was practically drooling by that point. Angela walked out of the kitchen and grabbed some napkins before she walked back to Candy, who was now handing her son a gift bag. "I brought this for you." Angela smiled as she looked at Brandon pulling out a toy truck from the bag. "See, now you can carry all your blocks in the back like those construction guys on TV," she said. And Brandon suddenly lit up as if his world was not already bright enough. I'll go get my blocks, he announced before he made his way to the corner where his toys were. So I guess that's it for the pizza with him, Candy said as she stood up. Yeah, for now. Angela opened the box and pulled out a slice of the chicken teriyaki side of the pizza. But definitely not for me. Good idea because I am starving, Candy said as she grabbed the box and walked over to the kitchen area. But before breakfast, she said after placing the box on the island. Take a look inside the bag, she said as she took a seat. Angela looked at the shopping bags in her hand and shrugged. Which one? I am holding 3. Well, the blue one is Brandon's. I saw these slacks and shirt as I was walking downtown the other day, and I just couldn't resist. Candy giggled. He is going to look like a little rapper. Angela put the bags down and reached into the blue bag to find a blue sweatpants suit with a Spider-Man print. This will go perfectly with the white trainers you got him last week, Angela said as she looked at Candy. I would show these to him, but he is too busy trying to get his truck to the construction site, she added as she looked at Brandon. The other 2 bags are for you, Candy said excitedly as she looked at Angela, obviously waiting to see what her expression was going to be like. Go on. I am dying of anticipation here. Angela looked in one of the bags and sighed silently. You didn't, she said in a whisper as she pulled out a shoebox. Really? Candy. This is too much. She pulled out the box of Brian Atwood heels and opened it. She could not help but sigh silently when she saw the beautiful shoes inside. Black high-heeled sandals with tassels that draped the arch of the foot. It was the kind of shoe that you expected to see gracing a celebrity's foot at a red carpet gala. She also knew that they were not cheap. They had to be at least $1,500 or thereabout. So? Candy asked, smiling. Angela looked at her and shook her head. She was used to having gifts from Candy almost every time she came to visit. But this was just too much. Besides, she worked in a retail store. The most glamorous thing she ever saw was when a local production company came in to shoot an ad campaign. The shoes would be wasted sitting at the back of her closet. Candy, these shoes are going to go to waste. I mean, what am I going to do? Wear them to the store? She asked. Well, they complement your other gift quite perfectly. Candy gestured at the other bag and Angela picked it up reluctantly after she put the other bag and shoebox down. She slowly pulled out a navy blue dress and once again, she gasped. She knew exactly which dress that was. She had seen it before on display on one of the stores in town once while walking with Candy. Now, you in that dress and those shoes. Tell me that wouldn't be the most perfect picture. Angela shrugged. Candy, you spoil us a bit too much. Well, you are my family. You and Brandon. If I don't spoil you, then who am I going to spoil? Candy asked. Angela held the dress tightly, almost like she was hugging it. I don't know what to say, Candy. You don't need to say anything. I already told you you are my family. Besides, I love living this life. Shopping every time I want to. Getting anything and everything I want. She smiled at Angela. Getting my sister and her handsome little boy stuff. Well, this means a lot to me. You taking care of us like this. I could not ask for more. Candy smiled as she opened the pizza box. Well, she started as she took a bite of her slice. It is either that or endless trips to Ibiza, and we both know that a holiday is not really a holiday unless you have your friends with you. Angela raised an eyebrow over the other as she put the bags down and slowly made her way to the small kitchen island. Wait, did you just get 2 slices of the pineapple and ham? Angela asked and Candy nodded. But I thought most pizza houses don't do this anymore. I have a hard time asking them to give me 2 equal halves in one. Candy shrugged. Please. There is nothing a smile and a few extra bills in the tip jar wouldn't do. Angela smiled as she took a seat next to her at the island. So, how is everything? I haven't seen you for a few days. Candy nodded. Yeah, I know. This week has been a little more brutal than usual. Amber and Celeste just stopped showing up, which is a little more than a coincidence, since they were both last seen the night some rapper booked out the club for a private party. Candy exhaled loudly. I am not saying that I hate doing it, the money is great, but Amber and Celeste have got some nerve. Yeah. I remember they did the same thing when the club hosted that guy who was rumored to be one of Drake's producers? Angela asked. and Candy almost choked on the bite in her mouth. Please don't remind me. She shook her head. 2 weeks of gallivanting around the country with some guy who was using their money. I mean, how stupid could they possibly be? I would be caught dead in a trench before I handed over any of my hard-earned money to anyone, Candy said matter-of-factly. Do they even know what it feels like wrapping yourself? She stopped mid-sentence and looked over her shoulder to make sure Brandon was not listening to them, and he wasn't. He was busy playing on the floor. Do they even know how hard it is to wrap yourself around a pole for hours on end? Angela took a bite of her slice as she felt a shiver down her spine. Don't remind me. There are days I had a backache that wouldn't go away for days, sometimes weeks on end, she said in between bites. So, does that mean that you don't ever want to come back to the club? Candy asked. Angela looked at her and sighed. She did not know how to answer that question. She never knew how to answer anyone who brought up her going back to the club. Of course, being a stripper was never her first career choice, but it was the choice she was forced to make by the universe. By the issues that somehow turned to be circumstances that shaped the direction her life took. She bit her lip briefly before she took another bite of her slice, hoping that her silence was an answer good enough for Candy. Angie. Candy pressed as she looked at Angela, who was trying hard to avoid her gaze. You know my answer to that, Candy. What? That you will not come back on some misguided notion that you will bump into him? Candy asked. By the tone of her voice, Angela could tell that she was a little agitated. There are other clubs around, you know? Angela nodded. I know, but as far as I am concerned, staying away is much better than tempting fate. Candy shrugged. Tempting fate? What the hell are you talking about? Well, it goes without saying that I am not exactly looking forward to being in the same place that took my innocence, Angela explained. I mean, not actual innocence, but you know what I mean. I do know what you mean, but it is not forever. It is just until you get enough to set yourself up. You and Bran. That has always been the plan, right? Candy asked, and Angela took a long, deep breath. She was right. That was what they had talked about for a long time. For her to dance for a few years to get enough for a small place out of the city. Angela had long been obsessed with living off the grid and with the new building technologies. She knew she did not need hundreds of thousands to get a decent home. Her plan was to get a lot of land, preferably on a lake property, and get 2 prefabricated shipping containers as her home. It was the perfect plan. Brandon would get to grow up experiencing the great outdoors, and she could slowly expand her home to suit her preference. It was the perfect plan. But all these had changed once she met her ex, and while her plans might only have been distracted for a little bit, she permanently changed her mind about her little utopia on the lake once she got Brandon. For now, she could only think about the well-being of her son, and every so often, she dreamed of her perfect home with her son. Angie, Candy said again when Angela took another bite of her pizza. You cannot tell me that everything changed. If anything, it should have changed for the better. Changed to keep you pushing forward. Angela took a long, deep breath. Angie, do you remember how good life was? How amazing it was to blow $2,000 on shopping and feel nothing? Candy asked, and Angela nodded. I remember. Wouldn't it be great to go back to those days? Just you and me going about town getting all the shoes we want, taking off to a cabin. Candy got off her seat and walked over to the sink. Maybe go to some tropical island like Ibiza, as I was saying earlier, or Cancun. She looked at Angela over her shoulder. It is always the perfect time of the year to visit Cancun. Angela opened her mouth to say something, but Candy did not give her a chance. Or if you are looking for something a little more local that still offers some diversity, Hawaii. Angela laughed. Seriously, Hawaii? Candy, do you even imagine me running around the beaches of Hawaii with a toddler running around? She took a bite of her own slice. I gave up any thought of normal life and fun when I had Brandon. I have another 13 or 14 years to go, and then he will be in college. Maybe an Ivy League, and then, and only then, will I even entertain the idea of taking some time off. Candy shook her head as she opened the fridge. You cannot be serious. She pulled out a pitcher of iced tea. There are a whole lot more women out there having children and living their lives. Take Beyoncé, for example. Real boss lady. got her first child and still toured the world. Gave birth and went right back to work. When she was not working, she was taking in the sun. So, why shouldn't you do the same? For starters, Beyoncé is a literal queen, and I am not sure about this, but I am sure that she has some help. You know, nannies and such, Angela pointed out. That is probably why it is not such a hassle for her being out there with her kids. So what? We could get a nanny to come with us so that you can get your sexy on while we are out there, Candy said as she turned around to get glasses from one of the shelves. You do realize that the whole idea behind getting away for a vodka. Her voice suddenly trailed off and Angela turned around to look at her, wondering what happened. Oh fuck, Angela thought when she saw Candy holding the stack of bills she had kept away from her line of sight. She had completely forgotten that she had placed the bills on the same shelves the glasses were, which meant that she had not done such a good job hiding the evidence of her problems. Angie, what the hell is this? Candy asked as she looked at her. She put the glass she was holding down on the counter and began flipping through the bills in her hand. Sweetie, you are barely holding on. Gas, your trash and recycling, heating. Candy shook her head. Candy, it is not such a big deal, Angie said calmly as she put her slice down and reached for a napkin. Yes, it most definitely is, Candy persisted as Angela walked up to where she was and got 2 glasses before she poured the iced tea into them. This shows that your heating and gas could be turned off at any time, even now. Angela took a long, deep breath. Not necessarily. I have made a plan with the landlord. Candy rolled her eyes. You made a plan with the landlord? Really? She asked. And what kind of a plan would this be, pray tell? Angela walked back to her seat. Keep your damn voice down, she hissed as she looked at Brandon, who was now making truck noises as he ferried his building blocks from one side of the floor to the other. Look at him. He is lost in his own world, Candy pointed out before she walked over to her best friend. What plan is this you speak of? It is not what you think, Angela said, and Candy rolled her eyes again. If you are thinking of the obvious way that women get things, then you couldn't be further from the truth. I would never think so lowly of you, but I cannot help but wonder what it is that you have planned with the landlord. Angela bit her lip, unsure of whether she should divulge the truth to her best friend or not. She was not proud of the fact that she sometimes found herself struggling to make ends meet, but at the same time, she was not comfortable telling the one person she thought she could tell anything that she had been working against the store she worked. That was the one thing she had kept secret for so long, and she longed to keep it that way. Angie, Candy said again. What arrangement? My employee discount at the store. He uses it every so often, especially when my earnings have not been as much as I would have wanted them to be. Candy was silent for a long time before she took a seat next to Angela. Come back to the club, she said in a soft voice. Come back to the club and get out of this misery already. Angela buried her face in her hands and suddenly began sobbing, to Candy's surprise. Candy put her hand on Angela's and looked at Brandon, who had now turned his attention to them. Got to the bedroom. Bran shouldn't see you like this, Candy said before Angie quickly walked into the bedroom. Candy took a slice of pizza and walked over to where Brandon was and smiled at him. Is Mama all right? He asked in a concerned voice, and Candy nodded. Of course she is all right. She just got a little excited because of the gifts I brought for her. Why don't you eat this and then you can go on playing with your new truck? Okay? She asked, and he nodded. She gently stroked his chin before she walked into the bedroom to find Angela on the bed, sobbing. I cannot go back there, Candy. Just the thought of it brings back thoughts of him. And how badly he treated me when I told him that I was pregnant. Angela rubbed her temple. Candy, I can't. I hate to sound like a bitch, but I have to be the voice of reason here. If anything happened, let's say there was an emergency or something and you needed money, what would you do? Because I would rather have you in the club than on a corner swinging dope. Angela looked at Candy and brushed off a tear. It would not come to that, ever. Really? How sure are you? Candy sat down next to her. I know that you are probably a little hesitant because of the stigma, but, honey, stripping is not a personality. It is a job just like being a lawyer is. Or a doctor. This is still not what I wanted to do. I thought that part of me was over, Angela said, shaking her head. And in case you have forgotten, I am more likely to swing dope at the club than just staying here. You could just dance and maybe even do some bottle service. The money has to be a lot better than whatever that retail store pays you after hours of sacrifice. Angela shrugged. I don't know. She started before Candy interrupted. Well, right now dancing is a necessary evil, Angie. Like I said before, it is just for a moment. Just until you get enough for that house at the lake you have always wanted. There was a long second of silence before Candy spoke again. Think about it, Angie. If it is an issue about Brandon's care, then I can make a plan for you to get a nanny, or I could stay and watch him on some nights, she said. That is very sweet of you, but you don't really have to. You're my friend, my best friend. I would not be able to live with myself if I didn't help you when you needed it. Angela nodded as Candy reached for her hand. Now come on. Brandon's is going to start wondering why the grown-ups have left him all alone. She got off the bed and began walking towards the door with Angela following close behind. I hate to say this, sweetie, but I have to go, Candy said as she sat back down at the island and took one last bite of her pizza slice. But you just got here, Angela lamented. Candy shook her head. I would have loved to stay longer, but I have some errands to run before I go back home. She reached into her bag and got a stack of bills that she placed on the island. Take this and think about what I said. Angela wanted to tell her that she did not really need her to leave her money, even though they both knew that she needed that money more than ever. Instead, she watched as Candy went over to where Brandon was and give him a warm kiss on his cheek before coming back to give her a hug. She smiled at Candy as she walked out of the apartment. Brandon was still at the living room table eating his slice as if he was tackling a mountain. Angela reached for the stack of bills and gasped silently. She could already tell that there was a whole lot in there, but it was not until she counted it to find $3,000. It was more than enough to settle her bills and have more left over. She had to admit, the idea of having such money was attractive to her. She could not help but wonder how awesome it would be to have that kind of money lying around, but at the same time, it was hard for her to think of herself as a stripper. She grabbed a napkin and made her way to where her son was. All done? She asked as she wiped his hands. Aha, good. Why don't you go on playing with your new truck? She said as she caught a glimpse of the time. It was already late. She had to get going or she was going to be late. She needed to get to work earlier than usual to deal with the stocktaking. After all, summer was around the corner.
Chapter 3. The air was crisp as Angela walked down the street. The bags on her hands were wearing her down. She could already feel the strain on her muscles as she walked to the next store. She already had 2 new pairs of shoes, a pair of black, glossy stilettos and sandals, but she had seen an ad in a magazine earlier that day and she knew that Giovanni's had just stocked some boots. They were basically offering every kind of boot you could think of. Ankle boots, flat-soled boots, knee-high boots. It was basically boot heaven. She pushed a strand of hair back and quickly made her way down the street, eager to get to the store. It was already late and she was still supposed to pass by another store and get something for Brandon, perhaps a pair of cute sneakers and a tracksuit in black and blue, his favorite color combination. She had just got to Giovanni's when she suddenly dropped her bags. She cursed silently as she bent down to pick up her bags, but she could not really see. It was like the floor had suddenly turned into this bright thing, and then there was this annoying, repetitive sound that just wouldn't go away. It kept on ringing and ringing and ringing. It was not until she opened her eyes that she found out that she was still in bed and that the annoying repetitive sound was her alarm. She reached for her phone and switched off the alarm before she lay back on the pillow. She exhaled loudly and closed her eyes. The feeling of disappointment that she had grown to know a little too well was like a bad smell that would not go away. It was almost ever present, something that had been happening since just before Brandon was born. Get it together, Angela, she said to herself as she pulled herself up. She would have wanted to stay in bed a few more minutes and indulge in the pity party she was throwing herself a little longer, but she did not have the luxury of time to do that. She had just enough time to get ready for work, give Brandon a bath, feed him, and drop him off at daycare, and that all had to happen before she got to work. She spread her bedspread and walked over to the bathroom where she got the water started. She was trying hard to think of something else, anything else apart from the fact that the dream she had would have been her real life. She thought to the days she used to dance, back before she got pregnant. Everything about her life was different. Even the apartment she lived in was better than the one she was in now. Back then, she did not have responsibilities, and what is a young woman living in a big city to do when she gets tips amounting to $2,000 a night? Sometimes when she was struggling to get enough for groceries, she would think back to those days. To days when she put on $600 pants and $2,000 boots. It was definitely a simpler time back then. She would have given anything to go back to that time, but at the same time, she would not have done anything differently if it meant losing her son. As far as she was concerned, Brandon was God's gift to her. To save her. It was either that or go on living the indulgent life she had been living, which had brought her dangerously close to drug abuse. God knows that if she had not discovered she was expecting, she would have most probably been a junkie by now. Maybe even dead. When she got out of the shower, she put on her work clothes and then woke her son. "Good morning, sleepyhead." "Time to get up," she said as she gently rubbed his back. His eyes fluttered open and he smiled up at her. She always loved how waking him up was easy, unlike most kids who were slow and groggy most mornings. She sat on the edge of his bed as he turned to lay on his back. "Do you want to give Mama a hug?" she asked, and he nodded. She took his hands and pulled him up before kissing his cheek. "How did you sleep? Did you have sweet dreams?" Brandon said. "Good. Now, I want to hear all about your dream last night on the way to daycare, but right now, you know the drill. Teeth first. I already set your toothbrush on the sink and then I will be in to give you a bath, all right?" He got out of bed and walked to the bathroom, leaving her to make the two beds before giving him a bath. When she was done, she laid out his clothes and went to the kitchen to make breakfast. One of the things she loved about Brandon's milestones was how fast he was getting through them, and he also stuck to his routine. He knew how to brush his own teeth and dress himself, and when Angela allowed it, he even made his own bed. This usually happened on the weekends, which was also when he helped with dinner. It was nerve-wracking watching him handle knives, so she would have him use one of the plastic knives she had bought for him. She was still not comfortable even when he handled the plastic knife, but helping out brought so much joy to him, and he knew that she only had a few more years before that phase was completely gone. He would be going to school soon and then camp, then before she knew it, he would be a teenager, and that was a whole different chapter she just wasn't ready for. "Let me look at you," Angela said when she walked out of the bedroom. She checked to make sure his shoelaces were secured before holding his face in her hands. "Someone has mastered the shoelaces. Up top." She high-fived him before she took him in his arms and gently set him at the table. "Careful not to get any on your clothes, okay, sweetie?" she said as she put a plate of scrambled eggs and sausage in front of him coupled with a glass of warm milk. "Okay, Mama." She quickly downed her own eggs and toast before straightening up the apartment. She was always impressed at how efficient she had become since becoming a mother. She always managed to juggle being a mother and working so well that it made her wonder why stay-at-home soccer moms always complained about hardly ever having enough time to run their errands. She always thought that it was a little ridiculous for someone who had a house in a great school district and a 401k to complain of how hard it was being a parent, and all that while having someone to co-parent with. Sometimes, all she wished for was just $4 more on her meager income to afford health insurance and a house in a school district where she would be comfortable sending her son to a school without a bodyguard. After dropping Brandon off at daycare, she drove to work and smiled when she noticed that she was well on time. Almost 20 minutes earlier than she was supposed to get there, which worked just perfectly for her. She had enough time to get herself some coffee and get enough alone time before the store came alive. She put her purse in her small office at the back of the store before she went to the break room and got started on the coffee. As she waited for her coffee, she leaned against the counter and looked around the place. She could not help but notice just how peaceful it was in there. It was a different kind of feeling. The break room was hardly ever peaceful. That was the one place that was ever busting with activity. The place where everyone went to get away from annoying, entitled customers. It was a wonder that she was all alone in there. She slowly unwrapped the sandwich she had picked up on the way and took a bite. Yeah, that definitely hits the spot, she thought as she felt the flavors explode in her mouth. Say what you will about a cheesy, bacon and onion sandwich, but it is definitely worth every cent. She was still savoring her every bite when one of her workmates, Darlene, walked in. "Why don't you two just get a room already?" Darlene said, and Angela smiled. "If you took a bite, you would know exactly what I am experiencing right now." "Did you get it from Angelo's?" Darlene asked, and Angela nodded. "Maybe I do understand that weird, almost sexual experience going on in your mouth." Angela laughed as she began pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Do you want some?" she asked Darlene, who shrugged. "I already had a cup earlier, but I guess one more couldn't hurt anyone, right?" she said. It was Angela's turn to shrug as she reached for a mug and poured her a cup. "How's Brandon?" Angela smiled. The mention of her son's name, the mere thought, always made her smile. "He's fine. Growing a little too fast though. I can hardly keep up." "I know, right? It feels like just the other day I was running after Kate and now she is just living her life, having parties, and choosing to stay with her grandmother over me." Angela laughed as she handed her a mug. "Trust me, cherish these moments." "So, have you heard about the new CEO?" Darlene asked as Angela took a sip of her coffee. "What are you talking about?" "What about the new CEO? The racism stories about him?" Darlene looked surprised that Angela had not heard about the racism rumors flying around. If anything, she should have been on top of everything. "I don't know what you are talking about," Angela said before taking another bite of her sandwich. "You are not serious." Darlene shook her head. "There is no way you would have turned a deaf ear to everything that's going on." Angela dabbed the sides of her mouth and took a sip of her coffee. "Come on, Darlene. I manage a retail store that sells clothes. I can hardly afford working with people who are more often than not childlike than adults." She took another sip of her coffee. "I could either do my job or do my job, and I don't know about you, but I kind of choose what puts food in my son's mouth." "Well, I work in the same store as you and I know about the racism going on in the company." The tone in Darlene's voice was defensive to say the least, and Angela could not help but smile. Of course she knew about the alleged racism in the workplace. That was juicy gossip, and Darlene loved her some juicy gossip. "Sweetie, you knowing about the latest gossip isn't really news," Angela said. "Your idea of keeping up with international news is checking out tabloids and the latest viral videos on BuzzFeed." Angela took another sip of her coffee. "I choose to focus on why the hell we are still splitting hairs about the delivery of our flat-soled strapped sandals." Darlene raised an eyebrow over the other. "I thought you talked to corporate about that." Angela shrugged. "I did, but for some reason the bureaucracy in the corporate office makes it near impossible to do a good job. And what's worse is that those sandals are our biggest sellers, especially in spring and summer." She took the last bite of her sandwich. "It is like I have to beg corporate to understand that no woman wants to endure the dead skin eaten by little fish off her feet only to put on socks and boots." "Like seriously?" She shook her head and Darlene smiled. "Sometimes I think that this is what you should do," she said. "What are you talking about?" "I am doing this job. Or have I been in a weird suspended state, thinking that I am living my life while in actual sense, life just went on around me and I have just been existing? Angela asked dramatically, and Darlene rolled her eyes. No. She wrapped her hands around her mug. Being up there with those suits that make the decision. Angela frowned. What? She asked. Get out of here. No, I'm serious. I mean, it would be great having one of us in there. Someone who truly knows and understands what it is like for us on the floor. Maybe there wouldn't be so much oversight that way. Angela bit her lip and sighed loudly. Yeah, probably. What do you mean probably? Darlene asked excitedly. Of course, it is going to be a good thing. I mean, you understand the dynamics of the workplace, the market, and what works. You are definitely so much better than a guy who has only known private schools all his life. This is why we have oversight, Angie. And this is how political careers are launched. Angela was smiling as she took one last sip and went ahead to rinse her cup. Think about it, Darlene said. She was pressing hard. Angela put her mug back on the dish rack and turned around, leaning against the sink. She took a long, deep breath. She hated that she had to ask, but Darlene had piqued her interest. Now, she wanted to know about this alleged racism that had Darlene so riled up. Tell me about it, Angela said. This alleged racism that you are so passionate about? Angela could have sworn that she saw Darlene's eyes light up at the sheer prospect of sharing her juicy gossip with her superior. So, you know that the retail store chain has had a new CEO for a few weeks now, right? But as it so turns out, he is like many rich, white men out there. That is why there are hardly any models of color representing this store. Angela frowned. First things first, that could simply be a mistake made by some very lazy cyberbully, and two, you and I both know that our society has a way of exaggerating the smallest of things. Every single molehill is Everest, and I say this with the purest of intentions. Not daring to downplay the many social problems of this country one bit. Darlene looked at her for a long time before she spoke. Are you sure you are not just saying what you think should be said? You know, being politically correct and everything? Angela took a long, deep breath. Well, to be honest, I would rather avoid politics in the workplace altogether, but I did not just say that for the sake of being on the right side of politics or any such thing. I said it because that is what I truly believe. She turned around and grabbed the towel roll before she tore off a couple of pieces. You should really consider how this impacts us as employees of color, you know. I mean, this place has more black and brown employees than white people, Darlene said as Angela wiped down the counter. We have the power. Angela turned around and looked at her. The power, she echoed. What for exactly? To make sure that the company treats us right, Darlene said, and Angela shook her head. I was wrong. This is not how political careers are launched. This is how mutinies begin. She balled up the paper towel and tossed it in the bin. I would prefer if we did not have this conversation again. She began walking out of the break room, and Darlene reached for her hand. What is it now? Angela asked exhaustedly as she turned around. You do know that I was just making conversation, right? Darlene asked, and Angela shrugged. Yes, but you were a little bit too passionate about the topic. A topic that you have no proof of, may I add. If everyone else is talking about it, shouldn't we at least consider what truth is there in the subtext? Darlene asked, and Angela exhaled loudly as she shook her head. Sometimes it was hard maintaining the boundaries between friendship and work. Darlene was not the easiest person to deal with, especially when she thought she had a bone to chase. Darlene, I really don't want to talk about this, Angela said authoritatively. Don't you have some work that you could be doing right now instead of talking about the man you depend on for your job? The look on her face said it all. Angela was not going to entertain any nonsense Darlene was thinking about. Darlene might have been a little disappointed as she walked away from Angela, but all Angela cared about was the fact that she had put Darlene in her place. That did not happen very often. After she got to her office, she dove right into her work, getting some admin work out of the way, but at the back of her mind, she kept on hearing Darlene's voice. She leaned back in her chair and drummed her fingers on the edge of the desk, wondering if she should look into the scandal involving her boss or not. Fuck this, she thought as she began typing the keywords into her search engine. She would have indulged in what she thought was simply propaganda when she got called out to the floor. Damn it, I guess the associates come first, she thought as she got up.
Chapter 4. Michael O'Brien wanted to fling his phone against the wall every time he got a notification because he knew what it meant. Yet another post about how racist he was. This had been going on for weeks, and being an O'Brien, he knew that addressing the issue was not going to help the situation. If anything, he was only going to make everything worse by saying anything. Talking about the talk of the town was only going to validate the rumors. He hated it, but this was how things worked, and he had learned to let things be. Michael was the kind of person who had been either lucky enough or unlucky enough to experience two extremely different industries: fashion and oil. The O'Brien name was one that was quite well known in Texas, being responsible for almost 4 of the more than 10 billion barrels Texas was known to produce, and at the same time, the name was just as well known in the fashion industry thanks to his uncle who had founded O'Brien Clothing. Having lived in a world that saw him see the world from 2 different points of view, Michael always knew what he wanted to know in life: fashion. His father was not as pleased because, as far as Michael O'Brien, Sr. was concerned, his son was the perfect person to take over from him. His mother was the supportive one who had encouraged her son to make his own way in the world by doing what made him happy. Perhaps it was because she had seen how talented her son was in the sketches he thought he hid so well. And after a long battle that he thought would never end, Michael finally got started on his own label, the Big O. It was not exactly easy getting into an industry looking to compete with a family member, but as he soon realized, O'Brien Clothing was a very different company from the Big O. The former was more popular with people in their 40s to 60s, while the Big O was more often than not synonymous with millennials, and given how big the entertainment industry was, it was no wonder his label grew so fast. He was not the only one who had surprised his family by venturing into something completely different from what the family business was engaged in. His best friend's family, the James family, had long partnered with his uncle when he first started O'Brien Clothing before they formally got together to make it the James O'Brien brand. Jackson, Michael's best friend, had also grown up knowing that he was not going to go into the family business. Unlike Michael, who was always sketching, Jackson was the one who grew up with his head buried in books. Chemistry and biology were his all-time favorites. He grew up obsessing over ER and Chicago Hope, dreaming of the days he would finally be in scrubs doing rounds for his own patients. So, it was no surprise when he ended up studying medicine at Cambridge. Even though Jackson was young, he had become quite the doctor at a young age. He was in his last year of internship, but he was already making a name for himself in the American medical field. He had assisted in a high-risk procedure in the field when a pileup on a highway made it almost impossible for ambulances to get through. Apart from that, the bad weather was not very conducive for a medical evacuation chopper, and there was a man with a piece of shrapnel lodged in his chest. It was not the most ideal operating room, but he and another doctor on the scene made it possible. After that, every hospital was out looking for the intern with balls of steel. He already had a great residency lined up, even though a number of top-notch hospitals were constantly waving their offers at him. On this particular Wednesday morning, Michael had hardly got any work done since he got to the office. Matter of fact, he had been pacing all morning. He'd had some tough times at work before, petty scandals engineered by his competition and bloggers looking for the next big clickbait. But this time round, Michael was scared. He was not so sure he was going to get out of this one strong. He could not think of the other end of the tunnel at all. All he could think about was how he was going to pull off a public relations miracle to get the company from the big black hole it was headed towards. Having been in the fashion industry for the better part of his adulthood, Michael thought he had seen it all. The messy last-minute problems caused by models throwing tantrums, the accusations that he was using sweatshops in Asia, and even the sex scandals that happened to prop up every so often. But this time, even though he had gone through hell a million times, he was not so sure he was going to get out of this one alive. It was not just models making his life a living hell. It was a mess that had him entangled in racism accusations that he could just not figure out how to get out of. Generally, there was no such thing as a good scandal, but he would have taken 30 models throwing tantrums before a catwalk any day if he could. This was the first time in a long time he had felt like his back was against the wall. He was still pacing when he heard a soft knock on the door. He looked up and forced a smile when he saw Jackson standing at the door holding 2 coffees. "Hey, the doctor's in the house," Jackson announced as he walked in. "And he brought coffee. A chai latte for me and a black one with sugar for the designer. How is it that you survive on less than 8 hours of sleep every single day after a 12-hour shift? And yet you look like you just had a glamour team work on you?" Michael asked as Jackson placed his coffee on the desk. "I keep on telling you. The secret is how you go to sleep." Jackson took a sip of his latte. "How? On the left side?" Michael asked. "Are you about to give me the waking up on the wrong side speech?" Jackson smiled as he took another long sip of his latte. "No, dummy." Jackson sat down and looked at Michael. "See, the normal person gets home and gets to catch up with their favorite TV shows while making sure to get enough time to check their emails." Michael shrugged. "Yeah, that's what every person does. That is kind of how the world works." Jackson shook his head as Michael took a sip of his coffee. "Actually, yes, but that is the worst thing you could do. Taking the work home is the enemy of progress." Michael exhaled loudly and walked around to his chair. "I disagree. Doctors cannot take their work home because that is kind of ridiculous. And dangerous," Jackson said matter-of-factly. "Yes, it is definitely dangerous to bring a patient home. But you see what point I am making here, Jackson? I take my work home because I have to, and if I don't, nothing is ever going to get done, and you cannot take your work home because it is, first of all, not practical, and two." Michael's voice trailed off. "I guess there is only one reason." Jackson took another sip of his tea and exhaled loudly. "Did you ever think of getting yourself a constant bedtime?" Michael took another sip of his coffee and shook his head. "I don't know if you have noticed it or not, but I am not 5 years old anymore. No, I am not telling you to go to bed at 8 or anything like that. What I mean is, have a written rule that if you begin your day at 8, then you will be done by 7 and back at your place by 10, Jackson said. "That is literally how my day goes," Michael said, raising an eyebrow over the other. "Wait, let me finish," Jackson went on. "The main problem is that you bring your work home with you, and as a result, you have longer days and shorter nights. What I do is get home after a crazy schedule, take a melatonin, and then have a shower before I go to bed." He sipped on his tea proudly. "I get a good solid 9 hours every single night. It would have been 8, but I make sure to get dinner at work or on the way home." Michael took a sip of his coffee and sighed loudly. "Right now, I don't think a good night's sleep is going to sort out my problems." Jackson put a finger up. "On the contrary, a good night's sleep is everyone's medicine, and if you have a hard time falling asleep, then do what I do. Take a melatonin when you get home and bam, a good solid 8, 9, or even 10 hours. You wake up feeling like $1,000,000. Michael forced a smile. Jackson seemed especially proud of himself. You would have thought that he was celebrating discovering sliced bread dot or maybe electricity going by the grin on his face. "JJ, seriously? A melatonin?" Michael asked, raising an eyebrow over the other. "Trust me on this. There is nothing a good night's sleep won't fix." Jackson leaned forward. "Get a load of this. Last week, some guy came in with cold symptoms and then before we knew it, he slipped into a coma. No one was the wiser, but I came in, a mere intern, and suggested a head CT. Now, normally, we would only do that if the patient had been involved in an accident, but there was not even a bruise on his face. But did I let that stop me? Hell no. I fought for my patient, and guess what?" Michael shrugged. "I don't know what to say, dude," he said. "Thank you would be nice," Jackson said, matter-of-factly before he sipped on his latte. Michael exhaled loudly and ran his fingers through his hair. Well, much as I would like to have a long, relaxing nap right now, I don't think I could even if I tried. There is too much going on right now. Is that why I found you burning a hole in your carpet when I arrived? Jackson asked, and Michael sighed loudly rather than answer. What's going on? Talk to me. Michael took a long sip of his coffee before he looked up at Jackson. I feel like my world is coming to an end, bro, he said after a long minute of silence. Why? Is it something I can help with? You know you can talk to me, right? Jackson asked, and Michael shrugged. Not unless you have a public relations company I don't know about. You are struggling with a PR crisis? How did I not know about that? Jackson wondered out loud. Well, you have been a lot busier lately, and I don't blame you, but a lot has been happening here, like the fact that I am being accused of being racist, Michael said as he got up again. Every single time he thought about the allegations, he just couldn't bear to sit down. It was like the allegations caused him to have actual needles on his chair. The actual thorn in his side in this case was everything that had been happening lately. Racist? You? Jackson raised an eyebrow over the other. They do know who you are, right? Michael O'Brien? The man who spent a big chunk of his paycheck to set up a community center for the disadvantaged and underprivileged? The humanitarian billionaire. As it turns out, that action has been seen as one of the many ways I am trying to get my ass out of the fire that is already under it. I am telling you, JJ, my ass right now is pure fucking coal, Michael said angrily. I called a press conference and gave my 2 cents. My human resources team handled the hiring. All I do is sketch the designs. Jackson shook his head. I'm guessing that did not work too well, he said. And Michael looked at him, fury all over his face. You think? He asked, reaching for his phone. My assistant had set up alerts for me just to keep me abreast with everything going on. But I wish he didn't. Take a look at this. He handed Jackson his phone and watched as his best friend raised an eyebrow as he looked at the many posts on Michael and his company. Seeing how Jackson reacted was a reminder of just how badly screwed up things were. Not that he needed one anyway. I don't know how I am going to handle this, and I am not saying that this could ever happen at a good time. But seriously, this is the absolute worst time this could happen. Jackson looked at him. Dude, there is never a good time to be racist, not that I am saying that you are or anything like that. No, I know .it is just. His voice trailed off. Really fucked up. Michael began pacing again. He was not sure what it was about pacing, but it seemed to calm him down somehow, and he badly needed to calm down if he was going to get an answer to his problem. Should I probably call another press conference? Set the record straight, maybe? Michael wondered out loud. Maybe if I distance myself from this whole crisis. Whoa, O'Brien, Jackson started as he leaned forward and put his latte on the desk. You need to slow down. Really slow down. How, JJ? How am I supposed to stay calm while everything is crumbling around me? Michael asked. I feel like everything is going wrong, and God knows. This is important to me. It is everything I always wanted. Everything I worked for my entire adult life. Looks like you need some tough love here. First of all, get yourself a new public relations outfit to handle your mess, or at least put a spin on things. Michael frowned. I already have a public relations department handling everything. My PR is in-house. Jackson nodded as he raised an eyebrow over the other. So, let me ask, this in-house PR, he started, leaning forwards. Are they the same guys who advised you to call the first press conference? The one where you put your foot in your mouth. Michael nodded reluctantly. I hate to point out the obvious, but you see where I am going with this? Jackson asked, and Michael exhaled loudly. He hated the fact that his mind had been so crowded that he did not even notice how fucked up his in-house public relations department was. It was like he had been sitting in a fogged-up room until that very moment. He clenched his fist and exhaled silently. Fuck! He hissed when he realized just how right Jackson was. Don't worry, we can fix this, Jackson went on. Getting a new person should be top on your list, and then we can take it from there. But this, pacing and making yourself go crazy, is not going to make anything better. Michael looked at Jackson and sighed loudly. He knew that Jackson was right. Praying for this disaster to blow over was not really going to work out. That is just not how the world worked. He looked at his coffee that was now not as hot as it had been a few minutes before, wondering if he should just get himself another cup of coffee. A cup that he would drink without thinking about the fact that his career was very much heading to a point of no return. He was about to say something when Jackson's pager suddenly went off. "Damn it. I guess I have to get going," he said as he got up. "No rest for the wicked, right?" "Never," Michael said. "I hate to leave you like this, but please don't overthink everything. Just go home, have some relaxing chamomile tea, and have some sleep. Everything is far clearer after you get some rest. All right, buddy?" Michael forced a smile. "Go and save some lives, Dr. James." "I save them, you dress them," Jackson said as he walked towards the door. "I already told you, JJ, that catchphrase is not going to work," Michael said, rolling his eyes. He had been saying the same thing ever since they talked about the path they wanted their careers to take while they were applying to colleges. "Yeah, whatever, dude. And you should probably know that I am not leaving you on your own." "No, I still have to." Michael started before Jackson shook his head as he beckoned Michael to follow him out. "Fabian," Jackson said as they walked past Michael's assistant's desk. "Whatever he had on the books today, cancel it. You cannot tell him to cancel my day." Michael started to protest, but Jackson was already pushing him out of the way. "Cancel it, Fabian," Jackson said again, the seriousness in his voice apparent. "Yes, sir, Dr. James," Fabian said with a smile. Michael was not so sure getting an early night and catching up with his sleep was the best thing he could have done, but it was not like he had any choice in the matter. Jackson was right. He had been spending a lot of time in the office, and for what? All he had been doing was pacing up and down. Something he had found out was not really helping. But even then, he found himself wondering what good going home was going to do for him or his company. Over the last few weeks, the one thing he found himself wondering was whether his company was ever going to get out of the black hole the media had created. When the frenzy first began, he had assured himself that all was well, that it was just a bump on the road to better things. After all, he was Michael O'Brien, founder, proprietor, and the creative genius behind what the fashion industry had called the best thing a millennial had ever delivered. But even with the high praise he got, his legacy was one public relations nightmare away from crumbling. He knew that everything was heading to shit when he went to bed one day with everything right in the world. His new collection was about to be released to the market, and the world was abuzz with news that the Big O would be dressing Hollywood's latest celebrity, Miranda Keller. That piece of news alone was worth everything because before he could wrap his head around the fact that he was now dressing celebrities, he suddenly got a call to show his designs on an exclusive Italian fashion show so special that it only ever showcased the very best to the top 1% of the top 1%. The kind of people who had so much money that they had their own special, not to mention private, fashion show. It was that kind of thing that would take the Big O to the next level. But he hardly got enough time to celebrate the news because he suddenly had to deal with the fact that the world saw him as a racist, and while this small group would not really care, this kind of bad press could very well ruin his company or even mark the beginning of the end of the Big O. This was not something he was looking forward to. The worst thing was that the accusations, though false, had some ground because when he looked into the models who represented his brand, they all had one thing in common. They were all blonde and brunettes with alabaster skin. He hated that he had never really noticed this. After all, he was just a designer. When he sketched for the female form, not any particular color. Even though he had almost nothing to work with, he knew that Jackson was right about one thing. He did need a new team working to clean up his image, and while the new team did that, he needed to prove to the world that he was not a racist designer. If anything, he loved how diverse the world was, and even though he had never really thought himself as a racist man, maybe it was time for him to get some new friends. But maybe all this can wait until I get off the effects of this damn pill, he thought as he rode in the cab Jackson had put him in. He was beginning to think that the melatonin he had given him really does work. "Hey there. Did you know that we've other hot romances like this that we want to release? But we need your help. Subscribing shows us that you're part of our journey and allows us to make more of these stories at a higher quality. So please, my queen, subscribe to the Romancely YouTube channel now. Thanks. Now back to your story."
Chapter 5. There was nothing Angie wouldn't have done to have a day where everything happened exactly how it was supposed to. As far as she was concerned, she would have given a vital organ if it meant having smoother days for the rest of her life. Days where her son was not fussy in the morning. Days where drop-off at the daycare was as easy as just a kiss on his cheek and that was it. Days when everyone at work did exactly what they were supposed to do, but for some reason, it was like everything in the universe was pitted against her. For instance, on Friday morning, she had to wake Brandon up not one, not twice, but 4 times. He had refused to eat anything except for some weird sugar-rich cereal he had somehow managed to sneak into the grocery bag when Candy helped her out with the grocery run earlier that week. As if that was not enough, she had not had a chance to do her laundry, so after spilling coffee on her last clean shirt, she had to make do with a t-shirt hoping that the fact that she was in charge was going to let her get away with not being in proper work attire. When she got to work, people were still sluggish as they had been for the better part of the week since the racism allegations against the store's owner came up. By the end of the day, she felt like she had pulled 3 shifts back to back without any sleep. The only thing that made her eager to get through the day was just going home at the end of the day and having some time with her son. When she clocked off, she passed by the grocery store and picked up a few things she needed for dinner before she dropped by the daycare facility. She smiled at the middle-aged woman who went in to pick up Brandon before she reached into her purse and got her wallet. Fuck, she thought as she looked through her wallet. After the groceries she bought, she barely had enough to cover Brandon's daycare. She had a guilty look by the time the woman came back holding Brandon in one hand and his backpack in the other. "Hi, sweetie, how was your day?" she said as she looked at an excited Brandon. She kissed her son's cheek and hugged him briefly before she got up. "As usual, this little guy was one of my favorite people in here," the woman said as Angela got up to look at her. "That's great, but I'm going to have to sort you out later." "Maybe the weekend?" she said guiltily. "Things are a little thick right now. I remember you had to take Brandon to the doctor a couple of weeks ago," the woman said in a heavy Spanish accent. Angela forced a smile and nodded. She had to pay a lot out of pocket because her insurance package only covered about 10% of total costs. She had always known that she had a shitty policy, but it was not until that period that she realized just how bad her policy really was. "You know what, you can give me the balance when you are ready, Angelita. I started this place to help people like you, mothers who are struggling, but that does not mean that I can let you off just like that." Angela nodded. "I know. I will make a plan. I'll give you a few days to sort everything out because you are one of the good ones. No drugs, no gambling. But I can only wait so long, Angie. Other people need my help too, you know." Angela nodded. "I will get you the money," she assured her before she led Brandon to the car. She was silent on the drive home, and even though Brandon was telling her of his day, she was not really listening. All she could think of was what she could do to make herself more money. She could have picked up a few extra shifts at a local diner. It was not much and she was probably going to get to spend less time with her son, but wasn't that better than having to watch her son go to bed on an empty stomach? She was still lost in thought when she got to her apartment. Brandon went straight to his toys and she got started on what she had in mind for dinner, sloppy joes. They were easy, fast, and definitely cost a whole lot less than the Olive Garden chicken she was in the mood for. As she stood over the simmering pot, she could not help but wonder what she was supposed to do about her backed-up bills. Growing up, her devout grandmother used to always say that God would never give you more than you could handle, but she felt like she was cracking under the pressure. Working so hard for so little, it would have worked if it was just her, but it wasn't just her she had to think about. She had additional medical bills and other bills that seemed to pop up almost every other day. She was drowning and she hated it. She choked back a tear and reduced the heat on the pot before she rushed off to the bedroom. She hated breaking down in front of her son, and whenever she felt the urge to release her frustration, she would hide and let loose. She sat on the edge of the bed, grabbed a pillow, and sobbed into it. She did not know what she was supposed to do. She was not sure if the few days the daycare facility had given her were enough to get the money she needed to offset her bills. It had been a few minutes before she took a long, deep breath and opened the top drawer of her nightstand to get a tissue, and that was when she saw it, the stack of bills Candy had given her. She had not taken anything from the money, and she did not even know why. Maybe Candy was right, she thought as she looked at the money. Dancing had its rewards. Making such money and maybe even more. I could even move to a better apartment. A place that has a super who actually cares when the water goes off. She was still thinking of what she was supposed to do when she heard Candy's voice in the next room. I should have never given her a key to this place, she thought to herself as she put the money back in the drawer and dried her eyes. She plastered on a fake smile and walked out of her room hoping that the smile was convincing enough. "There is Mama," Candy said when she saw Angela. "Candy, you are just in time for dinner." Angela walked over to the stove and uncovered the simmering pot. "We are having sloppy joes." Candy slowly made her way to where Angela was and shook her head. "You know, I had a different plan for tonight." Angela stirred the pot and got 3 plates from the overhead cabinet. "Of course you did. Why don't you get over here and help me slice the buns?" She handed Candy a serrated knife. "They are in the grocery bag." Candy took the knife, but she did not proceed to take the buns from the bag. Instead, she put the knife down on the counter and looked at Angela. "I wanted us to go out and paint the town red. Go clubbing with me." "What?" Angela shook her head. "No. I need to feed Brandon and just go to bed." "Angie, please. You have been holed up in this place at that dead-end job forever and I have let you be you, but it is about time you started living a little." Angela switched off the stove and looked up at Candy. "Candy." "No," she started before Candy put up a finger. "I am really tired." "Well, we both know that you will go to bed and not sleep because you will be thinking about how you can make the store more efficient. I hate to break it to you, Candy, but that is what I get paid to do." "Yes, but guess what? You work too hard and your bosses hardly notice because if they did, they would have given you 5 raises by now. But you don't even have a dental plan, honey." Angela looked at her best friend. "It is a Friday night and I have not made any plans for Brandon's care. You know I cannot just leave." Her voice trailed off when Candy got her phone from her pocket excitedly. "I have Samira's number on speed dial," she announced. Samira Hall was a local high school student who worked any and all jobs she could find in an effort to raise enough money to buy a new MacBook. She had been saving for as long as Angela had known her, but she had never stopped taking jobs. Angela actually admired that about her. She had learned how to be fiscally responsible at a very young age. However, her weekend babysitting rates were not exactly cheap, and it was not like Angela had a disposable fund idly sitting somewhere. "Samira charges $6 an hour and 8 on the weekends," Angela pointed out. "Yes, and 10 for every hour you are late." "I remember her charges. I actually helped her set them, remember?" Candy said in a soft voice. "Besides, we had another great week at the club. Rick Ross was in town." Angela shrugged. "Rick Ross? How did I not know?" she wondered. "Well, it was all hush-hush as I was made to understand. Apparently, there is a local girl who had his baby and they made a plan to keep everything under the radar. You know how these people are. So, the club was booked out for a private party on Wednesday and then yesterday we had a special promotional night." Candy dialed the phone and held it against the side of her face as Angela dished up for Brandon. "You are not going to take no for an answer, are you?" Angela asked, and Candy shook her head. Not at all. Hey, Samira. It's Candy, how are you doing? She walked to the bedroom and Angela cut up the sloppy joe into little bite-sized pieces for Brandon before putting a side of baby carrots on the plate. They were the only vegetables her son ate without a fight. She carried the plate into the living room and looked at Brandon, who had just built a Lego tower. Hey, sweetie, that is a beautiful tower, but it is dinner time. Okay, Mama, Brandon said in a soft voice, smiling at her. Did you make me reindeer joes? She shook her head. No, I do that for your birthday and Christmas, and today is neither. Now, why don't you go wash up for dinner and I will put your toys away? Okay, Mama. He got up and raced to the bathroom as Angela put his toys away. She had just finished stacking his toys in his chest when Candy walked in. So, Samira is on her way and you need to get ready for the night ahead, she said. And it is on me. So, you don't have a reason to say not to what could be the most perfect night we have ever had. Angela shook her head and exhaled loudly. I really shouldn't. It has been such a long time since I went clubbing. Which is exactly why we should do this. Candy led her to the bedroom. Come on. Let's get you something cute to wear. Given a choice, Angela would have chosen to go out in a pair of jeans and a cute top, but Candy had other ideas. She picked out a black and pink strapless combination dress and a pair of ankle boot heels. Candy was in a pair of shorts, a crop top, and heels so high that Angela wondered just how she would manage to walk, let alone dance. When they got to Rehab, one of the hippest clubs in town, Angela was already rethinking her choice going there in the first place. But it was too late to turn back. It had been so long since she was at a club, and being there was only reminding her of the life she had before Brandon came along. The carefree days and long nights at the clubs, meeting Brandon's father. Thinking about everything was frustrating to say the least. Why do you look so distant? Candy asked as she walked back to their table holding 2 cocktails. Just thinking that I should have probably stayed home or something. This is just reminding me of things before everything turned sour. And don't get me wrong, I love my little boy to bits. I wouldn't dare change anything, but given a chance, I would have probably picked someone else to be the father. Know what I mean? Candy nodded. Of course I do. Now, I need you to stop thinking about that and think about the fun we are going to have at the dance floor. She handed Angela a cocktail. We are going to have these and I just ordered some hot wings. So we are set. Candy frowned. Or should we maybe start the night with shots? Angela took a long sip of her drink. No shots. Cocktails and wings are fine, she said quickly. The last thing she needed was the hangover that came with shots. It might have been a long time since she went out, but she still remembered what kind of damage shots did to her. As the night went on, Angela loosened a little more. It might have been because of how many cocktails she'd had, or perhaps it was that being there with Candy made her forget every care she had, but she was finally having fun, and a lot of it. She had not realized just how much she had missed dancing until she actually got on the floor. She sipped on what felt like her 100th cocktail and looked around wondering if she still had the strength or sobriety to get back to the floor. She hardly had enough time to process her thoughts when Candy rushed to where she was. So, those guys just told me that they will get us a bottle of Ciroc if we go dance with them, she said, and Angela looked at the direction Candy was pointing at. I would much rather dance with them, she said as she looked at a tall, muscular Caucasian man in a dark suit. He looked like he was there for a business meeting or something, and she could not help but wonder why a man of his caliber was not in the VIP section. Candy was still talking, but Angela was no longer listening. She walked to the guy and took his hand. Dance with me, she whispered in his ear. This night is getting so much better, the man said as he followed her to the dance floor. She held the back of his neck and began dancing for him. The man was just looking at her, marveling at her sex appeal. She turned around and leaned against his body. She was grinding on him, twerking on a stranger, and the best thing was that for once, she had actually chosen a gentleman because he was not fondling her as they danced. Instead, he was just holding her waist, dying for the chance to move his hands higher to her breasts or lower to her well-rounded hips. Candy and Angela were at the club until it closed down. "When was the last time we partied until last call?" Candy asked as they waited for their Uber. "A long, long time ago," Angela said, laughing. "Back when I had more tolerance for alcohol." "Seriously, I feel like I have just had 30 bottles," she added as their Uber approached. "Come on, drunk Sally," Candy said as they got into the car. "I still have a hard time understanding how you can make such perfect sentences while you cannot even walk 2 steps without tipping over." "That's what I do. I drink and talk and stagger," Angela said, giggling. She reached for her phone as the car pulled out into the road. "What the fuck? How did it get so late? I have to be at work in 4 hours. Don't worry, I can crash at your place and watch Brandon tomorrow." "No problemo. You are a sweetie." Angela flung herself at Candy to give her a sloppy hug. Yeah. Just as long as you give me the details of you and the hot white guy you traded my Ciroc for," Candy said as Angela leaned on her shoulder. "What happens in rehab, stays in rehab, Miss Thing," she said without opening her eyes, making Candy smile. "Yeah, we will see about that, darling."
Chapter 6. It had been a while since Angela met someone who made her feel a certain type of way. Normally, the people she met left her feeling bereft and objectified, and because of having had to deal with the scum of the earth, she was quite content that the only man who would ever treat her the way she deserved was the man she was raising. So, for her to find herself thinking about that tall, white man she had danced with that Friday night she and Candy went out was totally freaking her out. It had already been 2 days since she last saw him, but every time she closed her eyes or sat down in silence to do anything, she found herself thinking about him. Everything about him. His demeanor, the way he spoke to her, the way he looked at her when they danced, the way he held her, the way he smelled. Her mind was clouded with thoughts of the mystery man she had met over the weekend, and what scared her more than anything was that at the back of her mind, she kept on wondering how possible it was to see him again. When she got dressed for work on Monday morning, she was still wondering if it was possible to maybe go back to the club and try her luck at meeting him again. She knew that the chance of seeing him again was almost zero, but a girl could dream, right? How many times did someone like her, a regular working black girl who was also a single parent, meet someone with so much charisma as Mr. Black Pants and long-sleeve designer shirt? A smile played on her lips when she looked at her reflection. She was wearing a black skirt and white long-sleeved shirt paired with a pair of open-toe flat sandals. They were perfect for the moving around that was required in her job, but also looked pretty decent. However, her favorite thing about her work clothes was how she looked in them. It was a simple outfit, black and white, but being the curvy woman she was, she filled out that skirt and blouse perfectly. Her naturally curly hair was pinned up in curly puff, which was her go-to hairstyle for everything. It was simple, it was easy, and most of all, it was free. She grabbed her jacket and purse and then led Brandon out. Unlike Friday, she had actually managed to make it out of the door in good time, and so far, her morning was going pretty well. Whoever said that you could tell how good a day will be by how it begins had her feeling some type of way. She actually felt like the sun was a little brighter. When she got to work, she got herself a cup of coffee before she made her way to her desk, where she was supposed to do some inventory. She had just started on a new batch of paperwork when she heard a voice outside her office. It was strangely familiar, and the worst thing was that it took her right back to that night at the club. It reminded her of Mr. Black Pants and long-sleeved designer shirt. "Snap out of it, Angie. This is not healthy at all," she thought as she rubbed her temple. She leaned back in her seat and shook her head. Just what was going on with her? Why did it seem like she was suddenly a slave to her feelings and desires? Was this what happened when you lived a life without men? Were you suddenly a servant of desire? She was still lost in thought when Darlene poked her head through the doorway. Hey, I was just told to tell you that they need you upstairs, she said. Angela nodded. Yeah, but why didn't they just use the extension? Angela asked. Darlene shrugged. Yeah, you need to have that checked out because I think what you have there is just a piece of junk. Angela raised an eyebrow over the other. Really? But I just had this installed. Her voice trailed off when she reached for the phone and held to her ear. What do you know? The line's dead. Thought so. You may want to hurry up and get to the office. Some bigwigs here, I guess, Darlene said before she rushed out. Angela took a long, deep breath and exhaled loudly. A bigwig was in the store and she did not have the slightest idea why. She was not so sure if this was a good thing or a bad one. For all she cared, she was about to lose her job. She slowly made her way out of her small office and then through the store. With every step that brought her closer to whatever was waiting for her upstairs, she felt her heart beat just a little faster. When she got upstairs, it suddenly hit her that she had only been up here once since she started on the job there. There were 2 rooms upstairs and one of them was used to store the rejects and surplus while the other one was almost always locked. She had actually asked if she could make that her office rather than the broom closet she was stationed in that didn't even have an air vent or window. When she got to the other door, she stopped and knocked softly. She waited for a few minutes before she heard a male voice ask her to come in. Good morning, sir. Angela. She started before she suddenly felt her voice fail her. She did not know the man, but she could not help but feel that she had seen him somewhere before. She just didn't know where. As she stood there, looking at the man, she felt her heart slowing down. Something about how he generally looked put her at ease. He was a tall, toned Caucasian man in a dark gray suit that was almost black and an off-white shirt. She was a considerable distance away from him, but she could see his dark hazel eyes that matched his perfectly toned skin and wavy dark brown hair. I'm so sorry, sir. It is just that I have this crazy feeling like I have seen you somewhere before. She bit her lip when the side of her brain that controlled her rational thinking kicked in. I'm sorry. That was quite unprofessional. The man smiled at her. Not at all. I have the same feeling as you. I don't know why, but I feel like I have seen you somewhere before as well. Angela smiled and slowly walked into the office. I am Angela Carter, the manager. Angela, hello. I am Michael O'Brien, new owner of the store. It is nice to meet you, sir. Mr. O'Brien. Michael smiled at her. Please, Mr. O'Brien is my father. Michael works just fine. Angela shook her head. I don't know if I could call you that, especially in front of the rest of the staff. Michael nodded and sighed loudly as he drummed the desk. Well, I guess that makes sense. He looked up and forced a smile. I'm sorry, I don't usually deal with everything on the ground. It is just that with everything happening, I am sure you have heard of the allegations against me. I prefer not to engage myself in petty company politics, Angela said simply. Smart of you, but anyway, because of everything, I am kind of taking a more hands-on approach, he went on. That is why I wanted to meet the people who make this place run like a well-oiled machine, and word is, you are the person to talk to when it comes to that. Angela shrugged. I don't know whether I would call myself as the person responsible. I just make sure inventory is done and people don't take long on their breaks. He forced out another laugh and exhaled loudly. He was now giving her the same look she had been giving him earlier. It was almost like he was looking right through her. Mr. O'Brien? Angela raised an eyebrow at him. Is everything all right? He nodded. Yes, it is just that. Seeing you here. He shook his head. I'm sorry. It is just that you look so familiar. She smiled. Well, perhaps we knew each other in a past life. He forced a smile. Yes, perhaps. So, would you like to sit down? He looked around and sighed. It was quite obvious that this office had been put together in a hurry at his behest. Apart from the seemingly new IKEA desk and chair, the room was totally and completely empty. The once dull, old paint on the wall had been replaced by a quick single-color job that could have done with something extra. Maybe some stencil patterns or perhaps some art. Whatever it was, Angela could tell that the space needed so much more than just a desk and a chair. Her broom closet walls were actually better than this room. I should have probably asked for the office to be well furnished in case I wanted to have meetings in here. She smiled. I don't mind standing. Okay, then I will make this fast. Tell me about the store. Angela took a long, deep breath. There is not much to say. Let me make this easier. How are we doing in terms of brand names? He asked, and Angela shrugged. Well, I guess we are not doing so badly. As usual, Chanel and Gucci are the customers' top favorites, but we also have more and more people coming in for other designers. All right, that's good. Do you have anything by the Big O? He asked, and Angela nodded. Yes, we do, but we have not had very good traffic with the Big O in the last couple of months. I could bring you the books. Everything is really well detailed in there. It wouldn't be too much of a bother, would it? He asked, and she shook her head. Not at all. I'll just be a few minutes, she said before he nodded. She smiled at him and quickly walked out of the office before making her way down to her small office, all the while wondering why she was feeling the way she was about him. She did not know if it was the way he looked or the way he spoke to her. Something about him was drawing her to him, almost like it was calling out to her. She just didn't understand what it was that had her all wound up. It was a new feeling for her. She was always so put together until now. It was like dealing with a whole new different person. She did not recognize herself. She did not know what had happened to the usually relaxed, composed person she knew herself to be. When she got upstairs, she could hear Michael talking to someone, and she had half a mind to simply walk in and put the files on his table. But what he was saying made her stop in her tracks. J. I don't know what to tell you, but I cannot get that girl out of my mind. No, I never took her number for some reason. Or maybe I probably did and forgot all about it. I did have one too many cocktails that night. Yes, and the weird thing is that I came to the store in town to get the lay of the land, and I could swear I was looking at that girl again. Yes, the same one from the club. But I guess it was one of those nights. Yeah, that's what you get for taking me to a club called Rehab. Angela suddenly felt a chill run down her spine. Rehab was the same club Candy had taken her to the previous weekend. Suddenly, everything made sense. The way he thought she looked familiar and she him. The way she had felt that instant closeness when she saw him. It was too much of a coincidence. Waiting out there seemed like forever, but she could not bring herself to walk in while he was still on the phone. When he finally hung up, she walked into the office and placed the files on the desk. You can ask me whatever it is that you don't understand. I'd be happy to explain it, she said, and he nodded. Sounds like a plan, even though the notes you have attached are fully comprehensive, he said, smiling when he flipped through the pages to see the differently colored post-it notes in there. Angela nodded and then turned around. She had just taken a few steps towards the door when she suddenly stopped. She turned back around, biting her lower lip. Did you forget something? He asked, looking up at her. I should probably not mention this at the risk of sounding unprofessional, she started, and he raised an eyebrow. Color me intrigued. I couldn't help but overhear that you were at rehab over the weekend? He nodded and gently put the file in his hand down on the desk. Yes, I was. I know it is none of my business, but is there any chance that was on Friday? She asked, and he frowned even more. She could tell that he wanted to move closer to her, but was doing everything in his power not to. As a matter of fact, it was. I was there with my best friend, and I met someone that night. Someone who looked a lot like you, but I'd had a few drinks, so I might be wrong. Did you dance with said person? He asked, and she nodded. Yes, and I did quite a lot actually. The only thing I remember is that the guy introduced me to this drink. Green Ghost, Michael said, and Angela nodded. Yeah, Green Ghost. Her smile grew wider. Nice to see you again, she said in a soft voice, and he forced out a laugh. Touché. They stood there looking at each other before Angela finally broke the eye contact and began backing out of the office. I should probably get back to work. He nodded. And I should probably get to those files, he said as he looked at her turn around and walk out of the office. She could feel his eyes on her as she slowly walked towards the stairs, and for a moment, she was tempted to stop and look over her shoulder. And she did, and regretted that move almost immediately because she found that he was still looking at her. Her cheeks were terribly flushed as she practically ran down the stairs and rushed to her office. When she got there, she sat down and buried her face in her hands, wondering what she had to do to take back the last half an hour or at least the last 5 minutes. Anything to let her reclaim her dignity, because as it was, she felt like she had hung herself out to dry. Why the hell did she have to tell him that she was the one he was taking about to whoever was on the other end of the line? For the next few hours, Angela was just sitting in her office trying as hard as she could to get some work done. Get anything done to at least put a dent in her workload, but nothing seemed to get her mind out of the embarrassing valley she had found herself in. It had been 2 hours since she talked to Michael, but everything about their conversation was so fresh on her mind. She was still lost in her own head when Darlene poked her head into her office for the second time that day. "You are needed upstairs again," she said before quickly rushing off, hardly giving Angela any time to react. She felt her legs get weak and once again, her heart racing. There was very little she could do to calm herself down, but she knew that she needed to do it anyway. She got up and took a long, deep breath before making her way upstairs once again. She found herself slowing down when she got closer to the office, but after taking another deep breath, she walked right up to the office and gently knocked on the still open door. "You called for me?" she asked. Michael looked up from the file he had been looking at and then got up. "Yes, do you mind coming in and shutting the door?" he asked, and she nodded reluctantly before she walked in and gently closed the door. "This is it. This is the end of my career as a store manager," she thought to herself as she slowly turned around. Michael began slowly walking towards her. "I know that we just met, professionally speaking, but I have to say you are stunning, Angela Carter." Angela felt a wave of relief wash over her, but at the same time, she was unsure of what she was supposed to do next. She wanted to stay there and listen to what else he had to say, but she also wanted to get out of there. "Say something, please." Michael's voice was soft. "I don't know what to say. I am just surprised. I guess. Friday was great. I mean, I had not had the freedom to just go out and enjoy myself or even meet new people, but I did, and I met you. I don't regret anything except the fact that I was a little under the influence. But I am clear-headed now, and I want the clear-headed Michael O'Brien to get to know Angela Carter. Maybe over dinner." Angela bit her lower lip. It was the only action she could control at that moment. "Okay," she found herself saying. "Okay. Dinner it is." Michael's eyes lit up. "Great." She walked to his desk and grabbed a pen before she looked at him over her shoulder. "May I?" she asked. "I just wanted to leave my number since my phone is still downstairs in my purse." He nodded. "Sure." She scribbled her number on a piece of paper before she turned around and walked up to where he was. "Can you meet me at Villa d'Est at 8? he asked, and she shook her head. "I'm sorry, Villa d'Est? As in the place people call in to get on a list?" She wondered out loud, and he laughed. "Don't worry, the chef is a good friend of mine. So 8. She nodded. "I'll see you there, Mr. O'Brien." "Michael, please, I insist." She smiled and walked out of the office, feeling a lot better than she had been feeling earlier. She got to her office and called Candy. "Hey, I need 2 things. Someone to babysit my son tonight and an outfit good enough for a Michelin star restaurant," she said when Candy picked up. "Done and done," Candy said excitedly. Angela could hardly recognize herself when Candy was done with her later that evening. Candy had brought her a simple black long-sleeved midi dress that framed every inch of her curves perfectly. She paired the dress with a pair of green heels, and her curls straightened out to a soft, silky look that cascaded over her shoulders like a black waterfall. The dress might have been more business than flirty, which was exactly what Angela was going for. She did not want to look like she was trying a little too much to be this flirty girl. When she got to the restaurant, she felt a lump in her throat as she was led to a private table on one end of the restaurant. She had heard of the restaurant and even driven past it once or twice, but she had never once pictured what it might have been inside. The warm tones of the interior decor, coupled with the soft music, were just perfect. She could tell by the envious looks she was getting from the women and the almost perverted glares from the men that the outfit Candy had brought her was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. "Here we go, ma'am," the hostess told her before she walked in the room. "Thank you." She smiled at Michael, who had stood up as soon as the door to the private room opened. It might have been a small dining room, but it was still bigger than most rooms. Hell, the room was bigger than her own bedroom for sure. "Hi," Michael said in a soft voice. "Hi." He walked up to where she was and pulled her chair for her. "You look breathtaking," he said as she sat down. "You clean up pretty damn well too," Angela said as she looked at his dark-fitting suit. When he walked back to his seat, the room got a little too quiet and Angela found herself wondering why she was there in the first place. This was not just another man out there. This was a man in charge of her career. This could very well go badly and she could very well lose her job. This was a bad idea, she thought. This was a very bad idea.
Chapter 7. Michael did not remember the last time he had met a woman who aroused such a desire in him the way that Angela did. It was not just physical desire, it was also the fact that she did not make such a big deal about who he was. Normally, he had to almost physically push the women away because more often than not, the relationship was meant to be a means to an end. A way for them to access his millions and live life on the fast lane. For Michael, women came easy, but they were never the kind of women he wanted. Angela was the full package. She was beautiful, she was sexy, and she even challenged him on an intellectual level. The only thing he noticed was that she was not so comfortable with him. After all, he was her boss. It was only natural for her to feel that way. Angela was all he had been talking about and Jackson could not help but notice that his best friend was more than a little smitten. "You really like this girl, don't you?" Jackson asked, and Michael shrugged. "She is the only good thing that has happened to me lately. The only person who doesn't look at me like they believe the stories out there." He shook his head and ran his fingers through his hair. "I don't know what to say, JJ. She really does make me feel like I can be happy again." "Dude, if you really like her this much, why don't you just go ahead and marry her already?" Jackson asked, and Michael's smile faded. It might have been too soon for him to take the plunge into marriage with Angela, but doing that would mark the end of the nightmare he had been facing lately. Marrying Angela, a black woman, would show the world that he was not racist and probably even save his company. His image needed him to do this. His company needed him to make that important step. "You know, that could be a great idea, JJ." Jackson frowned. "Michael, you do know that I was kidding, right?" he asked. "Yes, but even in joking, sometimes people make the best innovations while joking." "So, what are you saying exactly?" Jackson pressed further. "I could marry Angela and everyone talking about Michael O'Brien being a racist could have a reason to think twice, and she is a stunning woman. She must have friends of color. They could be inducted into the business, maybe get them to model." His voice trailed off as Jackson shook his head. "I don't know, Michael," he started before Michael suddenly bolted out from his chair. "Sorry, dude, but I need to go," he said as he ran out. Angela's eyes felt heavy. She had not had the best sleep the previous night. The date had gone well for the most part, but she could not help but wonder why the hell it had been so awkward. Awkward moments of silence, awkward touching, awkward accidents. It was all a disaster. The only good thing about the date was the food, but she was too wound up to even enjoy it. She wanted nothing but to go back in time and reset everything from that fateful Friday night. If only she could do things differently and maybe go to a different club rather than agree to go to rehab, and then probably she would have only met Michael in a professional capacity at work on the following Monday without having any strings attached. The colossal disaster that her date had turned out to be made it hard for her to sleep after getting home. She had spent the night tossing and turning, and because of that, she'd probably only got a couple of hours to sleep, which were barely enough for her to function. All she wanted to do was call in sick and go home, maybe have a long, relaxing nap. Or just sleep until the morning. She was quite sure that she could comfortably do 6 solid hours before she had to pick up Brandon and then do another 9 or 10 hours. She had just finished her 3rd cup of coffee when she heard a soft knock on her door. She looked up expecting to see Darlene or some other employee, but she was surprised to find Michael standing there, looking at her. "Hi," he said in a soft voice. "Michael. What are you doing here?" Angela asked. "I was not very sure you were going to pick up my calls or answer my texts after last night," he started, and Angela wanted to tell him that he was probably right, but she held her tongue. But he was wrong. She would have picked up the phone. After all, he was her boss. Actually, he was her boss. Or something like that. "May I come in?" he asked, snapping her back to the moment at hand. Yes, of course," she muttered as she looked up at him. "I guess my office is the only one without any guest furniture," he said as he looked at the chair in front of her desk. It was meant to be a joke, but she could not bring herself to smile. All she was thinking about was what reason he would possibly have to be in her office at that moment. "I am sorry for ambushing you at work, but I really needed to see you." She shrugged. "Why?" she asked. "Is there something wrong?" He shook his head. "I wouldn't exactly say it that way." There was a look on his face that told Angela he had been rehearsing what he wanted to say all the way to the store, and now that he was there, his very carefully rehearsed words were failing him. "Last night was a disaster. I am sure you feel the same way, and I am here to ask you for another chance," he said when he finally found his words. "Give me a chance to show you that we could be good together." She frowned and began shaking her head. She parted her lips to say something, but he was faster than she was, almost as if he was reading her mind. "I was jittery last night, and maybe you were too. And maybe it was too much too soon. Please, Angela, give me a second chance. If this doesn't work, then I will back off," he pleaded and looked into her eyes. "Please," he said after a long second of silence. "Okay," she said after thinking about it for a second. "We can try this again." She smiled when she saw Michael breathing a sigh of relief. It was like agreeing to his date had lifted this huge load off his shoulders. Candy was only too excited to fill in as a stylist for Angela and Brandon's babysitter for the 2nd night in a row. Angela would have been comfortable in jeans and a shirt, but Candy was adamant. "The man took you to a 5-star restaurant on your first date. There is no way a man who pays $300 for a steak on his first date takes you anywhere that you would need jeans and sneakers," Candy had said as she helped Angela into a mustard yellow knee-length dress and a pair of maroon heels. It was not a look she would usually go for, but again, she made anything look good. Candy had held her hair back in a low messy bun. When Angela looked at her reflection before she left the house, she could not help but feel like pure sophistication. She made the likes of Kate Middleton and Meghan Markle look like distant wannabes. "I want to know everything," Candy had said excitedly before Angela left. Michael had planned on doing everything differently on the makeup date. He had spent the day looking for a good place where they could enjoy the food and still have a conversation, and every time he looked up a restaurant, he could not help but feel like there was no restaurant out there that fit his need. Apart from good food, he also wanted a quiet place. A place where they could dine in peace without some aspiring designer or model ambushing them looking for their next big break. Or even worse, someone accusing him of being a Confederate. He needed to make a good impression, and after great deliberation, he found just the place. He had asked the head chef at Villa d'Est to do the one thing he never did, give a cooking class. Of course, that was going to cost him, asking a Michelin star chef to give a class, but he was Michael O'Brien. Affording Umberto Locatelli was the least of his problems. He knew he had made the right choice when he saw Angela smiling as she kneaded the bread they would later dig into. He knew he had made the right choice on the date. He could even tell that she was comfortable even though the date was in his penthouse. Everything about that evening was perfection. "I really hope you like what Chef Umberto made," he said when Umberto placed their food in front of them. "Are you kidding me?" Angela asked. "It looks great and smells divine." Umberto smiled at them before he walked away, leaving them to their herb-grilled steak and fresh Italian bread with a side of vegetables and herb-dipping sauce. The dinner was as Italian as it got, and it looked perfect. "I have to say, I never thought I would have food prepared by the famous chef Umberto, let alone learn from him," she said, smiling at Michael. "Well, I never thought there was a day I would have heavenly bread made by the most beautiful woman I have ever seen," he said as he reached for a piece of the sliced bread. "You are a pretty smooth operator, aren't you?" she asked as she looked at him dip the bread in the sauce. He held it up for her and she frowned. "I wouldn't." "Come on, it's just us here," he said, smiling at her. She leaned forward and let him feed her the sauce-soaked bread. "Oh my God," she muttered as she closed her eyes. "One no, right? You cannot buy that at any store." "Definitely not," she said as she took a bite of her steak, which was just as perfect. "I must admit, I did not think that this was going to be better than the other night, especially when you told me that the date would be at your place." "Yeah, with everything that was happening, I didn't think of any place where we could actually have some private time, and considering the private dining didn't work so well last time, I didn't want to take the risk." She took a bite of her food and looked up at him. "Well, you will be pleased to know that so far, you have all the points." Michael smiled and pretended to tip his imaginary hat. He got up and walked to the counter before he came back with a bottle of red wine. "More wine?" he asked. "Yes, please." "I don't know what wine that is, but it is amazing," she said as he refilled her glass. "It is a 40-year-old Merlot from Africa," he said, filling his own glass. "It was a gift from a friend I made during the South African Fashion Week some time back." 40-year-old wine? Angela looked at her glass. "Suddenly, I feel so unworthy." Michael laughed. "If anything, this wine should be the one looking to be worthy of your mouth." He looked up at Angela and saw her frowning. "That sounded a whole lot better in my head." She giggled. "That's okay. I know what you meant." She took another sip before she took another bite of her food. "So, talk to me about you. Who is Michael O'Brien?" He shrugged. "There is not much to tell. I am just your everyday designer, but today is about you. Talk to me about Angela Carter." Angela shook her head. "This would be a much longer conversation if we talked about you, but hey, I am just your everyday store manager." "What do you do when you are not making sure people are not taking longer breaks?" he asked, smiling. "I would probably be spending time with my son," she said, looking right at him, maybe to see how he would react. "Your son, huh? How old is he?" he asked, still looking at her. 4. Little guy with energy fit for 10 grown men. His grin grew wider. "Maybe one of these days I can meet him and share some of that energy?" he asked. Angela felt a surge of warmth go through her body. "I would love that." Needless to say, Michael was having a great time, and judging by how relaxed Angela looked, he could tell that she was having a good time. After dinner, Michael looked at her as he waited for Umberto to serve their dessert, cinnamon sugar waffles topped up with vanilla ice cream and strawberry slices. "This has been really great. I hardly think I have enough room for dessert," she said as he looked at her. "I'm sure Umberto will not mind packing up some sweets for you and the little man at home," Michael pointed out. "What's his name?" "Brandon," she said, smiling. Michael nodded. "Good strong name." "Yeah, I guess." I needed him to grow up strong and a perfect gentleman. That's really admirable, Michael said in a soft voice. I would like you to take a trip with me. She raised an eyebrow over the other. Wait, what? She asked, surprised. How did we go from my son to taking a trip with you? I find you intriguing, Angela Carter, and I would be honored to see more of you. This is happening too fast, Michael. I mean, you are my boss. And she shrugged. This feels like a dream and I don't want to lose myself in it. Why not? He asked. If this is a dream and it feels this good, at least for me, then shouldn't we just allow ourselves to get lost in it? You know, I was always taught that if the deal is too good, you should think twice, and I cannot help but wonder if there is a catch I should know of. He shook his head. No catch here. Just a man looking to know an intriguing woman, that's all, he said. So, what do you say? Angela wanted to answer him, but she was tongue-tied. The only thing she was able to say was ask for the bathroom. Down the hall. Last door on the left, Michael said as he stood up. She got up and walked out of the dining room, fully aware that his eyes were on her perfect curves as she walked away. She could not help but notice the perfection of his penthouse. His house was just as elegant as he was. The high ceilings coupled with the bright art-lined walls made her wonder how a perfect piece of real estate like that existed barely an hour away from her crappy apartment. She leaned against the door when she got to the bathroom and closed her eyes. She did not know what she was going to say to him when she walked back to the table. She had half a mind to make up some silly excuse and just go home. Why would he want to take her on a trip? What the hell is happening? She wondered in a whisper. Am I in the Twilight Zone or something of the sort? She could not understand for the life of her why a man like Michael, a man who could throw a rock and get any woman he wanted, want her of all people? She was just a glorified saleswoman. But the way he was treating her, it was as if she was the embodiment of a goddess. And as if that was not enough, he did not run for the hills when she told him about Brandon. Normally, men ran almost as soon as they found out that or even suspected that there was a child involved. Why do I feel like there is a catch here? She asked no one in particular as she paced up and down. She could not help but feel that there was something very, very wrong with the universe. All she had to do was wait for the other shoe to drop. It took a while before she finally walked back to the table. Michael had a concerned look on his face at the table. Is everything you okay? He asked, and she nodded. Yeah. You know, this has been a lovely evening, but I was thinking that you probably had a great idea earlier about Chef. Her voice trailed off when she realized that she had forgotten the name of the chef, which was weird since he had been her favorite celebrity chef on Chopped. Umberto, Michael said, and she nodded. Yes, him. Michael frowned. Are you sure you're okay? He asked, and she nodded. Yeah, I just really need to go home. I should probably get home to my son. He nodded. I'll let him know. He got up and walked to the kitchen, leaving an obviously nervous Angela back at the table. Angela clenched her fists hard and exhaled deeply as she waited for him to come back. It was just a few minutes before he walked back to the table, but it seemed longer. Actually, it seemed more like 10 minutes before he came back. I also got a car to take you home and I would hate to just leave you this way. She shook her head. I will not take no for an answer, Angie, he said, and she nodded in defeat. She hated that the awkwardness they had tried so hard to get over was somehow creeping back in. The ride back home was awkwardly quiet. When they got to her apartment building, he got out of the car and walked around to her side to open the door for her. He took her hand as she stepped out of his town car, but he did not release her hand. He was looking into her eyes, almost like he wanted to say something or hear something. I am sorry about the trip. I should not have brought this up so soon. No, it is fine. I would love to go on a trip with you, she said in a soft voice, and Michael's eyes lit up. Really? She nodded. He pulled her into his arms for a quick hug, making her almost drop her packed dessert. You have no idea how happy you have made me. He pulled away and once again looked into her eyes. He was standing even closer to her, so close that she could feel his breath on her cheek. She felt her heart skip a beat when he leaned in and brushed his lips against hers. It was a soft kiss. An ever so light brush that should have made her blush, but she felt absolutely nothing. I'll call you tomorrow, okay? He said, and she nodded before he got back in his car. She waited until he drove off before he walked into her building, wondering why, after all the chemistry she thought existed between them, she had not felt anything in his kiss. She exhaled loudly as she approached her door. She could not wait to be out of those heels. They were cute, but probably the most uncomfortable things she had ever had to wear. I want to hear everything, Candy said when she walked in. What are you doing up? It is late, Angela said as she took off the heels. Are you forgetting the industry I work in? I only get to sleep like at 4 in the morning, and that is if I am lucky, Candy said. How is Brandon? Angela asked as she tiptoed to the bedroom door and poked her head in. He was great as usual. We played some Jenga, had dinner and a movie before I put him to bed, Candy said as Angela tossed her purse aside before walking up to the couch. So, how was dinner? Candy asked as Angela sat down next to her. Delicious. I couldn't get through to dessert. Angela placed the packed dessert on the table. I will dig into that as soon as you tell me how it went. Candy tapped her excitedly. Well, I think this guy likes me a little too much because he just asked to take a trip with me. Candy's eyes grew wide. Really? Where to? Angela shrugged. I don't know. I just don't know if I should do this. I mean, I hardly know the guy and he is here jetting me around the world. Why? I don't think he is being genuine, Candy. You do know that this guy is the Johnny Versace of our time, right? Angela looked at her and shrugged. What the hell are you talking about? She asked. He's the guy behind the big O, Candy said matter-of-factly. Please tell me you knew that. Angela shrugged again. She'd heard the rumor that the new store owner was the same guy accused of being racist, but she had never really paid much attention. Suddenly, a lot of things made sense, like how Michael was able to get a private dining room in a place that had a 3-month-long waiting list, or how he was able to get a Michelin star chef to give them a cooking class. But all in all, she still did not think she had made the right decision. I think you are overthinking everything, Angie. Just let loose and have fun. There are some good men in the world, and clearly, this guy is one of them, Candy said just as Angela's phone buzzed loudly. She reached for her purse and got her phone. Oh my God, Angela muttered under her breath when she saw the text that had just come in. It was from Michael telling her that he was going to take her to Hawaii the following day. This is insane. I already told him I have a 4-year-old at home. Oh please, Angie. Hawaii! How many chances do you think you will get to travel to Hawaii? Candy asked. Go on. I will watch Brandon. We have had a great time lately and I love spending time with the little guy. I don't know, Candy. It is not just Brandon. It is work. He owns your store, Angie. He can easily get someone to fill in for you, so stop making excuses and just get packing already, Candy said. Angela smiled at her best friend before she replied to Michael. As far as Candy was concerned, this was exactly what she had been praying for all this time. She put her phone down and smiled. "So, are we going to have this ridiculously expensive dessert or are we going to pack first?" she asked. "Why don't we just do both?" Candy said as she reached for the Tupperware on the coffee table. Angela smiled at her. "Yes, let's."
If you want more BWWM romances like this, please my love, be sure to subscribe to the Romancely YouTube channel. I look forward to spending more time with you. Subscribe and let's make it happen. Chapter 8. The hotel Michael picked out was the definition of heaven. It was on a private island that overlooked the lush Hawaiian vegetation on one side, the pool on the other side, and the main view, which was the most beautiful one, was of the sea. Their suite was equipped with everything she could have ever wanted to relax. But the one thing she loved most about the suite was the private jacuzzi. However, even on the island, which was the literal embodiment of what heaven on earth looked like, she still didn't know if she had made the right choice or not. This feeling became even more apparent that night when they went to bed. She was not sure what was supposed to happen. Was she supposed to snuggle up to him, or was he supposed to hold her? She found herself thinking that perhaps the kiss had complicated things a little too much. But after how perfect the next day was, Angela assumed that all their firsts were probably cursed. The day had been perfect, to say the least. A late breakfast, a long day in the pool, followed by a luau the resort was hosting. She did not know if it was the fact that she'd had a few drinks at the luau or just the fact that she was beginning to get more comfortable about him. Whatever the hell it was, she was feeling a lot more comfortable around him than she had been with anyone in a long time. It was only 9 when they got back to their room, but thanks to all the cocktails she'd had, Angela felt like it was much later. "Whoa there. Careful," Michael said when she almost fell. He secured an arm around her waist as he slipped his key card into the slot and opened the door. They stumbled into the room and he closed the door behind them, still holding her close. He looked down at her smiling face as she brought her hand up and ran her fingers through his hair. "Has anyone ever told you how perfect your eyes are?" she said, and he laughed. "It is official. You are drunk. Maybe, but I am also in the sort of mood that makes me want to do this." She slipped a hand around his neck and pulled him down to meet her lips in a long, sensual kiss.
"Oh no, it's about to get hot, but we can't put this on YouTube as they don't allow it." "I'm sorry. But check the description of this video to join the Romance Audiobook Insiders for free and get details on how you can get the steamy scenes in future." Okay, back to the story.
"I would never think that of you." "Well, I know, but you brought me out here and it is beautiful. But I really want to be more intimate with you." "Angie, there is no rush," Michael said as he lay next to her. "I respect you too much to force you into something you are not ready for." "I'm just not ready. I don't feel ready just yet," Angela went on. He got closer and planted a gentle kiss on her forehead. "Well, there is no pressure from me, Angie. You can count on that," he said before they both drifted off to sleep. Sleeping next to Angela in nothing but her bikini bottoms and not being able to touch her was killing Michael. The fact that he had seen, touched, and even tasted her nakedness only made it more difficult for him to keep himself in check. Holding her all night long without actually touching her was killing him. That night was perhaps the hardest he had ever had. He was surprised he actually got any sleep at all. When he woke up, it was a little past 6. Angela was still asleep in his arms, her curls framing that gorgeous face. He gently caressed her cheek using his finger and planted a soft kiss on her forehead. He pulled away to see her eyes fluttering open. "I'm sorry I woke you up," he said. "No, it's okay." Her voice was groggy. "What time is it?" "Early." He kissed her forehead again as she pulled away from him. She held the bedding against her chest and he smiled. It was cute seeing that she was still shy about letting him see her naked, even though they had done a whole lot the previous night, including her reenacting the night they met at the club by grinding on his crotch. "I'll get breakfast delivered before we get started on the day," he said. "Started on the day," he said. "I wonder what you have planned for today. Maybe another luau?" she asked as she struggled to keep her eyes open. "No, nothing like that." He was smiling. I was thinking of something a little more relaxed today. Something fun and something that will get the heart rate going. He reached for the phone and called the front desk. I don't want to sound like a total and complete idiot, but I think you just described a spin class, she said, making him laugh. He stifled the laughter with his mouth and put a finger up. Yes, hello? This is Michael O'Brien from the Camden Suite. I would like a full breakfast delivered to my room. Yes, I did. High protein and lots of fruit. Yes, please. He looked at Angela. Would you rather have toast or pancakes? She shrugged. Surprise me. 2 orders of toast. Yes, thank you. He hung up and looked at her. So, no spin class. He smiled at her. Ever. At least not for me. But the mountains here are gorgeous. I thought we could take a hike together. She got off the bed, still holding the bedding against her chest. A hike, she echoed, and he nodded. There is a spot out there which in my opinion is one of the best things I have ever seen. You get to take in the lush greenery on one side and the water in the horizon. He forced out a laugh. It is perfect. So, you have been here before? She asked. Yeah, when I was 10 and the world was all music and rainbows. She frowned. When you were 10? She asked. Is that how long it has been since you let loose and had a good time? He shrugged. I was thrown into a life of tough career choices when I was really young. So when the family went off on vacations, I was supposed to go to medical camp all because I showed more of an interest in fashion than medicine, which is what my parents wanted for me. She bit her lower lip. I'm sorry, that sounds terrible. He nodded. It was, but hey, all that made me the man I am today, right? She secured the bedding and sighed loudly. I'll go take a shower now. Sure. Michael would have wanted to get into the shower with her and marvel at her wet, naked body, but what she had said to him was still fresh on her mind. She was not ready. Angela had never really been hiking. It was not a matter of not wanting the experience. For her, it was the fact that she had never really had the chance. But she was an outdoorsy kind of person, and she took in nature the only way she knew how. The TV. National Geographic was one of her all-time favorite channels. She was just happy that she got the channel on basic cable. However, she realized that doing the actual groundwork was so much better than watching it on TV. Hearing the birds singing or the twigs and dried leaves crack under her feet. Smelling the fresh air. It was far from the noisy city she had grown used to. She would have done anything to make that day last a little longer. But the one thing that made her happy to be out there was finding out that Michael had been right. That spot up there was perhaps the best she had ever seen. Ever. They were sitting in silence on what was probably the highest point of the island, looking down at the vegetation and farmland when he reached for her hand. She leaned back, resting her head on his shoulder as they took in the perfection. This is nice, perfect, even, he said in a soft voice. Yeah, it is. I could live out here. Forever. Bring my son so that he can see what it feels like to play in the dirt, carefree, and I can probably get a greenhouse going, do some homesteading. Maybe even get a few farm animals. He looked at her and smiled. You would give up a life in the city to stay here? There was genuine surprise in his voice. She shrugged. Yeah, why not? It is perfect out here. Just you and nature. She smiled. Like I have always had this fantasy. It's stupid though. Let me be the judge of that, he said as he ran his hands up and down her arms. I have always wanted to have a place away from the city. Some place like Vermont where I can do some gardening in the morning and have long walks in the evenings. I've never really been there, but I have checked out some photos. It looks perfect. Vermont, huh? He asked as he pulled back her curls with his free hand and kissed her temple. It was not just a quick kiss. It was a lingering one laden with sentiment. You know, until right now, I had not realized that I had always pictured someone like you when I thought of what I would like my future wife to be like. Someone who loved nature as much as I did, and someone who paid more attention to Michael, the man, and not Michael, the designer. Angela felt her heart begin to beat faster. Why are you saying all these? I don't understand. Marry me, he suddenly said. The words were clear, and Angela knew that there was no way she could have heard the wrong thing. She wanted to turn around and look into his eyes just so she was sure she was not mistaken, but she did not have the strength to turn around, let alone the emotional capacity to handle looking into his eyes. "What?" she asked in a whisper. "Marry me, Angie. You are the woman I never knew I was looking for." She pulled away from him and exhaled loudly before she turned around. "Michael, you hardly know me," she started as she looked at him. "And thousands of people around the world get into arranged marriages without knowing a thing about their partners. And they have been proven to work 100% of the time as compared to the conventional ones." He reached for her hand and traced his thumb over her knuckles. "I have this strong feeling that it could work between us." "Just like that?" she asked. "You would make such a commitment to a person you have not even, you know." He raised an eyebrow. "A person I have not slept with?" he asked. "Is that what you wanted to say?" She nodded reluctantly. "Yeah. You know, the fact that you think that is a factor for me tells me everything I need to know about you. You are a picture of perfect innocence, the kind of person I know I want to have a future with." He pulled her sunglasses away and took off his own before he held the side of her face. "I don't know what to say," she said as he looked into her eyes. "I'm sorry. I know that this is all happening too fast, but I have to admit, I have never felt this way about someone so fast. It is scary, but something in me is screaming that I should hold on and see where this goes. You know?" Her gaze fell and he raised her chin with his finger. "There is no pressure from me, but promise me that you will at least think about it," he said in a soft voice, and she nodded reluctantly. A million thoughts were crossing through her mind at that moment, and for a split second, she felt like everything had slowed down around them. She wondered what she would have done if she had known him longer. Maybe for a few more months or even a year. Could she have given him a chance? Or would she have waited? On the one hand, he was the complete opposite of the men she normally met. The deadbeats who prioritized drugs, alcohol, and women, always looking for the next high in life. Michael was a caring man who did not even bat an eyelid when he heard that she had a child by another man. This alone was enough to tramp all doubts on her mind. "Okay," she suddenly said in a soft voice. "What?" Michael was looking at her, surprised and excited at the same time. "I'll marry you," she said, her voice even lower than it had been before. Michael was just sitting there, looking at her as he processed what she had just said. Instead of saying anything, he slipped a hand at the back of her neck and leaned in to kiss her. She exhaled into his mouth and brought a hand up to hold on to a lock of his hair as they kissed. Their passionate kiss grew more intense and he leaned in, getting himself on top of her. She was panting by the time he pulled away. "We better slow down or I will take you right here on this mountain," he whispered as he pressed his forehead against hers. She bit her lip, thinking that sex on the mountain probably wouldn't have been too bad. After spending most of the day hiking and taking in the local sights, Michael and Angela headed back to the hotel. Angela showered as Michael made plans for an early dinner. He was quite pleased with himself so far. Angela was not only hot and sexy, she was also nice. Incredibly nice. It was hard for him to believe that he had actually met someone who was this perfect. He could not help but wonder if the privileged girls he met in his social circles acted the way they did because they had so much in life. Here was a woman who had experienced so much in life at such a young age, but it was like everything she had gone through had only made her stronger. She might have had a strong outer shell, but once he got through, he found that she had this soft, warm heart. He had just finished checking his emails when Angela walked out of the bathroom in a white, floral strapless maxi dress. Her curly hair was hanging loose, framing her face. The dress might have been a loose fit, but he could see the outline of her curves and he just wanted to go over to where she was and just pull her into his arms. If there was one thing he knew so well, it was that she was a sexy woman. Her entire being exuded sex. He could feel himself getting hard just by looking at her. "Wow," he said in a soft voice. "You look, just wow." She tucked a curly strand behind her ear. "In this old thing?" She slowly walked to where he was. "It is perfect," he said before looking down on his jeans and shirt. "Now, I kind of feel like a jerky Charlie Sheen in this." Angela giggled as she walked towards him. "You look great." He looked at her as she walked towards him and a smile played on his lips. He slipped an arm around her waist and pulled her close to him. "Hi, fiancé," he whispered before he kissed her. She giggled again and wrapped her arms around him. He lowered his head and met her lips in a soft, lingering kiss. Hi, she whispered when she pulled back. Our dinner awaits. I hope you like Thai. Yeah, I do, but… She raised an eyebrow over the other. How are we going to get it exactly? Oh, I've got a few tricks up my sleeve. Thai food in Hawaii, he said proudly. But this place is as remote can get. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure you can find it in the mainland, but we are all the way out here. Oh, trust me, we can. He kissed her again before leading her out. Getting Thai food in the resort was not the easiest thing, but he knew that a heavy tip to one of the chefs would get him exactly what he wanted. Their table was on a balcony overlooking the moonlit pool, setting the mood for their dinner. I hope you are loving your noodles, he said as she took the last bite of her food. Honestly, I never thought it was possible to enjoy noodles the way I just did. She reached for her glass and sipped on her wine. Culinary perfection. How about you? How's yours? She frowned as she looked at the spicy chicken chunks he had been eating. Basil chicken. He took a chunky piece in his chopsticks and lifted it to her mouth. Try it. I don't know if I could have any more food, Michael. Come on, it is just one bite, he insisted, and she leaned forward and let him feed her. Wow, I know what I will be having next time, she said in a soft voice. Don't worry, we could always come back, he said as she sipped on her wine. Maybe after we get married. Angela felt her cheeks flush hot red and she sipped on her wine again. It could be as soon as tomorrow, you know, he said, and she almost choked on her wine. What are you saying? She asked. Marry me here. Tonight. Angela's mouth was open in surprise as she sat there, wondering what she was supposed to say. Michael could almost see her thought process. He reached for her hand and smiled at her. Angie, I know that this might be moving a little too fast for you, and I understand why you would be hesitant. But there is something my best friend always told me. He shrugged. When you know, and I know exactly what I want. You. He looked around and shook his head. The last time I was out here was the last time I had a genuine conversation with my father, and he told me that places like these are made for lovers. People who see their entire futures in each other's eyes. Angie, I have been dreaming of coming back here with that person since that day, and I found you. So I brought you back here. The cool ocean breeze blew on her cheek and she shivered a little, making her grip his hand unwillingly. Marry me tonight, Angela Carter, he whispered as he looked into her eyes. We are in paradise. I will throw you a big ceremony if that is what you want. Angela smiled nervously and nodded. Yes, I will marry you. Tonight.
Chapter 9. As a young girl, Angela had always pictured her perfect wedding, and as many girls did, she thought of a fairy tale wedding where she would have that beautiful ball gown and a tiara, but as she grew up, her idea of her perfect wedding had changed. All she cared for was having her best friend there, who had grown to become more like a sister, stand by her as she said I do to the man of her dreams. But now that she and Michael had gone to Hawaii, she did not even have her best friend, and that was important to her because she did not even have anything she could have worn to any wedding, let alone her own, which was why Michael's big surprise was such a big deal to her. He had her sent to a different room where she got a full body massage as well as her hair and makeup done. As if that was not enough, he had a new dress delivered to her room as well. A simple strapless chiffon dress and a pair of silver sandals. There was a note in the package that housed the dress from him. You had on a strapless dress the first night I saw you. That is why I know you are going to rock this too. She smiled as she got the dress out of the box and held it against her body. He was right. She was going to rock that dress. The makeup artist looked at her and smiled. Now, do you still think that wearing your hair down was such a bad idea? She asked, and Angela shook her head. You were in on it, weren't you? She asked, and the woman, Leanne, who looked no older than 25, shrugged. I couldn't give it away. That look you have right now. That is why I do what I do, and if I get to partake in the surprise factor, then I am only too happy to indulge. Angela took a long, deep breath. "Leanne, am I making a mistake?" she asked. "Oh, honey, I have seen countless weddings out here and I love seeing people celebrating love, and what you are feeling is perfectly normal," Leanne assured her. "If you did not feel the way you were feeling right now, I would have probably told you that you were making a mistake. But, honey, that feeling in your gut, that is what tells me that you are not with him for all the wrong reasons." Angela smiled. "Thanks, I really needed to hear that from someone. Normally, it would be my best friend, Candy, but I guess this is what happens when you elope, right?" Leanne nodded. "But, you know what, I wouldn't advise you to do it the conventional way, if you were not really feeling it." Angela frowned. "Really? Why?" "I mean, the whole thing is an industry. If anything, I know you would have made much more making up a bunch of bridesmaids." Leanne pushed back a stray strand of her hair and nodded. "True, but I only stand behind it because I believe in it and because that is what I did with my husband 4 years ago." Angela's eyes lit up. "Color me interested." Leanne laughed. "My husband and I were planning a small ceremony and we had saved up for that, but when we began doing the groundwork, we both realized that neither of us wanted it. We just wanted to be together. So, we took off, went to Vegas, and had an Elvis impersonator marry us. It was perfect." Angela shook her head. "What about your family? What did they say?" she asked. "We had a reception dinner back at home with everyone. It was great. What I am saying is your family is going to be happy for you regardless of the choices you make, because that is what family does, okay?" Angela bit her lip and nodded. "Good, now come on and let me help you with your dress. You have to be downstairs in 15 minutes. Michael had never really known what he was looking for in a wife, and even though he might have been rushing the new relationship with Angela, he had to admit that seeing her walking towards him at the beach gave him all sorts of chills. He had asked the resort to make preparations for the wedding ceremony at the beach by getting the wet sand lined with rose petals and lights. The tide was low enough to make the place safe enough for ground lighting. The soft lighting coupled with the moonlight and ocean waves made the perfect background for a private romantic wedding ceremony. He even had a live band, hula dancers, and a film crew to document the whole thing. He was not a very sentimental person, but he knew that Angela was going to want to remember every part of that evening. "You look amazing," he whispered to Angela when she got to where he was. "You clean up pretty damn well too," she said as she looked at his linen pants and shirt. "Shall we begin?" the minister asked, and they both nodded. They looked at each other as the minister went through the lines that he had gone through so many times before. All Angela and Michael cared for was the few lines and questions that mattered, and it seemed like forever before the minister finally asked them. "Do you, Michael, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" he asked, and Michael nodded. "A million times, yes," he said, smiling at Angela. "And do you, Angela, take this man, Michael, to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," she said in a soft voice. "You may now exchange your rings." Angela frowned. "I didn't," she started before Michael reached into his pocket. "Don't worry. I've got this." He took her hand and raised it to his lips. "You look like a size 6 to me, so I hope I am not wrong." He began sliding the ring down her ring finger. "With this ring, I promise to love you and Brandon, be the best role model to him, and always protect you." Angela's eyes welled up, and as much as she tried holding back her tears, it was not really working. She looked down at her left hand, now perfectly donned in a yellow, white, and rose gold wedding band. It did not only look good on her, it was also a perfect fit. He placed a matching band in her hand. "Your turn," he said in a whisper. She took a long, deep breath and bit her lip. "With this ring." She shook her head and looked up at Michael. I don't know what to say. Say whatever is in your heart, Michael said in a reassuring voice. Okay, Michael. Ever since I met you, this has been a wild ride and I have been happier than I have been in a very long time. So, with this ring, I promise to be your partner in more of these wild rides and be the best wife possible. She slipped the ring on his finger and looked at him, smiling. All right. With the power given to me by becomeanordainedminister.com and by the state of Hawaii, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride, the minister said as Michael slipped an arm around her waist and pulled her into his arms. He held the back of her neck with his free hand and kissed her deeply. Hello, Mrs. O'Brien, he said when he pulled away. Hello, husband, Angela whispered. Let's party. Leanne yelled as the band began playing and the hula dancers began dancing around the newlywed couple. Angela had been impressed with what the hotel staff had done as far as pulling together a wedding in such a short amount of time, but when they got back to their suite, she was even more impressed. The staff had transformed their suite into a honeymoon suite with candles, music, and rose petals. What? When did they even have time to do this? She asked when they walked into their suite. Honestly, I have no idea. I am as surprised as you are. She looked at him, shaking her head. Why do I feel like you are not being so honest with me? She asked. He laughed and pulled her into his arms. Well, it looks like I have a lot to do to make you believe me, he said in a soft voice as he kissed her cheek. Because this was a surprise for the both of us. He kissed the other cheek. The strawberries, though. That was all me. She smiled as he lowered his head to kiss her again, this time on her mouth. This time, the kiss was longer and more intense. He pulled away and pressed his forehead against hers. I know that you are exhausted after the day we just had. You can go ahead and get to bed. I will join you in a few. He started to walk away but realized he could not because she was still holding his hand. Where are you going? She asked. I was going to check my messages and then come to bed. She shrugged. I don't know much about weddings, but I am pretty sure that people are not supposed to check their messages on their wedding night. Her voice was soft, and Michael could see that she was blushing even in the dim lighting. Are you saying what I think you are saying? He asked in a soft voice as he looked at her. Hi there, unfortunately we've had to take this steamy scene out as it's against YouTube's terms of service. If you don't want to miss out on love scenes in future stories, check the description and join the Romance Audiobook Insiders for free for more info. Okay, back to the story. He cradled her and planted a soft kiss on her forehead and together, they drifted off to a deep sleep. When Michael and Angela woke up the following morning, they were both exhausted. They had made love again in the middle of the night and they had both brought their A game. Angela would have wanted them to stay longer in Hawaii. It was not only magical. It was also a little piece of heaven where she actually had a relaxing sleep every time she closed her eyes. She was a little disappointed when Michael announced that they had to go back home that very day. Something came up at work and it is not something I can delegate, he said as he held her face in his. But I promise you, I will make it all up to you. The honeymoon doesn't have to end just yet. She smiled. It better not, she said, and he leaned in to kiss her cheek. It won't. Now, get packing. We need to be wheels up in 2 hours. Angela had sent Candy a message telling her that she would be home later that day. With Michael going to work, she knew that she couldn't just stay home alone. So, she made sure that Candy and Brandon would be home when she got there. Ready to face the world? Michael asked when they touched down. I guess. I don't really feel any different, she said in a soft voice. And there is no reason why you should, he said, holding her hand. Well, there is the little fact that I traveled in a private jet. That is definitely something to make me feel different. He kissed the back of her hand and undid his seatbelt. She undid hers and exhaled loudly before she stood up and headed towards the doors. Her heart was racing, perhaps because she was excited to see her son and best friend, or maybe it was because it was finally hitting her that she was a married woman. She was smiling as they stepped out, but her smile faded when the camera flashes almost blinded her. "What is happening?" she muttered, hardly having any time to process what was going on. The next thing she knew was Michael's arm around her, shielding her as they fought through the army of paparazzi to get to the town car that was waiting for them. It seemed like an undoable task getting to the car, but when they finally did, she could see that Michael's demeanor had changed. "What the hell?" she wondered as she looked at him. "I am sorry you had to go through that. I forgot how much of a mess my life back here is." "Yeah. Why does the press know about us being married? And why are they asking me what it feels like to be part of a PR campaign?" she asked, and he exhaled loudly. He interlaced his fingers with hers and looked at her. "Baby, I'm sorry to say, but this is my world. It is crazy, messy, and maybe I should have waited a little longer before I threw you right into the deep end." His voice trailed off when she leaned in and kissed him. "Hey," she said when she pulled away. She stroked the side of his face, smiling. "I dove into the deep end. I did it, and I will help you through this. You don't care that your husband has been accused of being a racist businessman?" he asked, and she shrugged. "You are going to hear some stuff about me too. This is simply my turn to be the strong one. So, anything you need, let me know." He smiled and gave her hand a squeeze. "You are incredible," he whispered. "I don't think I could have gotten a better wife if I tried." She kissed him again before leaning on his shoulder. They rode in silence the rest of the way before the car dropped her off at her apartment building. "I could have taken you to my place," Michael pointed out, and she shook her head. "No, it's fine. I need to talk to Brandon about everything before he suddenly meets his new stepfather." Her voice trailed off, and she shook her head. "I guess we didn't really think this through," he said, and she nodded. "But don't worry, we are going to get through this." He pulled her into his arms and held her tightly. "I hate that I have to leave you alone. But I will be thinking about you all day long." His hand slid down her back and squeezed her well-rounded ass. "All of you." She giggled as she pulled away. "Go on and remember to hydrate while working," she said before she got out of the car. She waited for the car to drive off before she walked into her building. With every step that brought her closer to her door, she felt her heart beat a little faster. It was true that they had not thought the whole process through, because now she had to have what was probably the hardest conversation she had ever had with her son. When she got to her door, she took a long deep breath to compose herself and then finally walked in to find Candy and Brandon on the couch watching Brandon's favorite show. "Mama," he cried excitedly when he saw her. He sprinted from the couch and ran into her arms. Angela wrapped her arms around her son and kissed him over and over again. Until that moment, she had no idea just how much she had missed her son. When she pulled away, she held his small chubby face in her hands. "I missed you." "Oh, honey, I missed you too. And I brought you something," she said before she opened the bag she had dropped to the floor and pulled out the huge box that caused her to stuff most of her clothes in Michael's bag. "It's that train set you wanted for Christmas," she said excitedly. "Is it Christmas already?" Brandon asked innocently, and Angela laughed. "No, I just wanted to get you something for being such a good boy for Aunt Candy," she said as Candy walked towards them. "He was an angel as usual," she said before Brandon ran off to play with his new toy, leaving the two to hug tightly. But you haven't been such a good girl, Mrs. O'Brien. She pulled away and took Angela's left hand. I can't believe you got married. Tell me everything. She led Angela to the kitchen and took a bottle of water from the fridge. Don't you dare leave out a single detail. Angela laughed. I don't know what to say. I mean, it was just a surprise, but it was beautiful. Candy shrugged, smiling. I am so happy for you, she said as she reached for Angela's hand. And the man has style too, she added as she looked at the ring on her finger. The problem is the other man in my life, Angela said as she looked at Brandon. I don't know how to say this to him. We have never even talked about his father. I can help you with that. I watched as one of the new girls at work introduced her kids to her new boyfriend. I picked up a thing or two. Candy, this is different. This is not just a boyfriend. Which makes it so much easier. Candy was rolling her eyes. Come on. Angela barely had enough time to say anything before Candy walked to the couch. Candy, wait, she started, but Candy had already called Brandon. There will never be a better time, Candy said, and Angela exhaled loudly. Candy was right. There was never going to be a better time. She sat down and sat Brandon on the coffee table. Candy started by explaining the concept of marriage as simply as the 4-year-old could understand before Angela went on and told him that the ring on her finger meant that Michael loved both of them. It was actually not as hard as she had thought it to be. When she was done, she had told him exactly what he needed to hear, that she was in love, married, and that he was going to have a new daddy. And she did all that without ever having to bring up her deadbeat ex. If she had to give her opinion, it was a good talk.
Chapter 10. Slipping back into normal life for Angela was as easy as ever. The only thing that was different was that she had a wedding band this time around. She was somebody's wife. She had just gotten dressed when she heard a knock on the door. She had a feeling that it might have been the building super who was finally coming around to fix one of the many problems in her apartment. But this was not one of those times she had it in her to have a pleasant conversation. She was already running late and she could not afford to get to work late. She had already missed almost an entire week of work and without notice too. She could only imagine the kind of melee that was her workplace by then. She sighed loudly when she heard the knock again. I really don't have the time for morning guests, she thought as she rushed to the door. She already had an idea of the harsh words she was going to give to the super, but all the words seemed to disappear when she opened the door to find Michael standing at her doorstep. Good morning, Mrs. O'Brien, he said in a soft voice before he leaned in to kiss her softly. Mike, hi, what are you doing here? She wondered out loud. Well, I am here to take you and Brandon to your new home, he said proudly. She shook her head. New home? I don't understand. Well, our marriage may have begun a little strangely, but generally families live together, under the same roof. She was still trying to wrap her head around the fact that she was finally moving out of that dump when he touched her chin. Aren't you going to invite me in? He asked, and she stepped aside. Sorry, I'm just processing everything. He walked into her apartment, and she closed the door. She leaned against the door, and he looked at the jacket and purse on the kitchen counter. Are you going somewhere? He asked, and she nodded. Yes, work. He shook his head, smiling. Yeah, you do know you don't have to work anymore, right? He asked, and she shrugged. What are you talking about? I know that you don't enjoy your job. You made that clear while we were in Hawaii. I want you to do something you are passionate about, and you can figure out what that is while you make a home of that humongous empty house of mine that is now ours. So what? Am I supposed to just cook and clean in the penthouse? She asked, and he shrugged. The penthouse has access to a beautiful rooftop garden that I hardly ever visit, and I heard you talk about doing a little homesteading. Maybe you can start with a few veggies up there, and when things cool down at work, I will take you out to my place at Vermont. You will fit right in. Vermont, she thought excitedly. She had never really been there, but she had seen a lot of pictures. She knew exactly how perfect Vermont was. It was perhaps the best thing she had ever seen and the best dream she had when she thought of her future, and now, it was a reality thanks to Michael. She was still smiling in disbelief when she heard Brandon's voice, prompting her to turn towards her son. "Baby, hey, and who is this handsome little man?" Michael asked, squatting. Brandon looked at Angela, who smiled at him, reassuringly giving her son the go-ahead to walk over to Michael. "I'm Brandon," he said when he got to where Michael was. "No way. Your mama said Brandon was a little baby. But you are such a big guy. Almost as tall as me." Brandon giggled. "Tell me, do you like lightsabers?" Michael asked, and the little boy's eyes lit up. "Good. Because I have been looking for someone to play with." Brandon looked at Angela. "Mama, can I go? Please?" he begged. Angela and Michael exchanged a knowing look. "Well, sweetie, you know what? You can, and the good news is that we are going to live there from now on," Angela said. Brandon looked confused. "Why?" he asked. "Because that place is bigger and you can ride your bike." Michael started before Brandon interjected. "I don't have a bike." "Well, not here. But you sure do over there," Michael said, and the little boy flung himself into his arms. "Whoa, okay." He picked him up in his arms and looked at the little brown-eyed boy. "Are you the man who gave my mama a ring?" Brandon asked, and Michael smiled, nodding. "Yeah, and she gave me one too. See?" He held up his left hand for Brandon to see. "It looks just like your mama's." Brandon inspected his hand for a long second before Michael walked over to Angela. "Pack only the sentimental stuff. We can always get anything and everything else you will need." And he reached into his pocket and pulled out a car key. "This is your new set of wheels. It's parked downstairs and the address is already programmed in the GPS. I have some things to take care of at work and then I will see you back at home." Angela's eyes welled up as she looked at the new car key in her hand. "Mama, why are you sad?" Brandon asked, and she forced out a laugh. "I'm not sad, baby. Just happy," she said as she wiped off her tears. Michael leaned forward and held Angela's cheek before he leaned in and kissed her. "Don't cry, baby. I'm here now," he whispered and then kissed her again. He smiled at Brandon and put him down. "I have to go now, but there is a surprise for you when you get home. I hope you like Spider-Man." Brandon nodded excitedly. "I love Spider-Man," he exclaimed. Michael smiled at him and ruffled his hair before he walked to the door. "Be careful on the road, baby," he said before he walked out of the apartment, leaving a stunned Angela standing there as Brandon fired question after question. But she could not really hear a word he was saying. After packing, Angela drove her new car to Michael's penthouse. She had only been there once before, on the evening of their make-up dinner date, and she had only seen the kitchen, living and dining rooms, and the guest bathroom. And even though that was like 10% of the house, she was still very impressed with what she saw. Her entire apartment could fit in half the kitchen twice over. However, seeing the property in daylight, Angela was even more impressed than ever. The house was empty save for the housekeeper they found in there. "Hello, you must be Mrs. O'Brien," the short, middle-aged brown woman said, and Angela smiled. "Please, just call me Angela." The woman smiled. "Okay, Mrs. Angela. I am Valeria," the woman said. "This must be the little man, your son Brandon, yes?" Angela nodded. "Yes, this is my son. Brandon, say hello to Auntie Valeria," she said as she put a hand on his shoulder. Brandon waved at her shyly and hid behind his mother. "Don't worry. I am sure we will be great friends," Valeria said as she took the bag Angela was holding. "No, it's fine," Angela said, but Valeria was not giving in. "Please, let me," she insisted, and Angela handed her one bag, the lighter one. "I can carry this one, Valeria. Thank you. Welcome, please. Feel at home." Valeria seemed more excited than Angela was to be there. "I just finished with Brandon's room. I hope he will like it." Angela looked around the familiar house. Everything looked so different in the daylight. As she walked on the rich marble floor, she noticed that the place did not only look different because of the lighting. Michael had taken the steps to toddler-proof the space. The last time she had been there, She noticed that the penthouse was the epitome of a bachelor pad. The furniture was all white and there were glass tables. A remote-controlled gas fireplace, but all that was gone. The white sofa and glass coffee table were gone, as was the glass dining table. In their place was a gray sectional sofa complete with throw pillows and a snuggle blanket. The glass tables had been replaced by a mahogany dining tables and a matching coffee table. She could not help but wonder how Michael had pulled everything off in such a short period of time. When they got upstairs, Valeria led them to Brandon's room, and Angela felt her heart skip a beat when she saw how excited her son was to see the Spider-Man-themed room. It was beautiful. It was what she had always thought of doing for her son if she could afford it. A beautiful cozy room with a small study desk on one end and a toy center on the other side. A small bike was parked on that corner, and it was no wonder that Brandon rushed there first. Angela looked at Valeria and shook her head. "Did you do this?" she asked, and Valeria nodded. "Mr. Michael told me to get the house ready, and he sent me all the instructions. I have been working on it for the past 3 days," she said proudly. "And downstairs? The furniture?" Angela asked, and Valeria nodded. "But it doesn't look like anything Michael would do. He asked me what he needs to do to prepare the house for his new wife who had a 4-year-old son, and I just did what felt natural. It is what I would have done for my children." "Oh, wow! How many kids do you have?" Angela asked, and Valeria put up 3 fingers. "They are all grown up now. The youngest just went to college," she said proudly. "Cherish these moments, because one day you will wake up alone in this house when he is away at college and wonder where all the time went." Angela smiled. "A friend of mine told me the same thing just recently. She is right, you know." Valeria started as she led Angela out. "Come. I want you to see the other bedrooms." "Just how many bedrooms are in here?" she asked. 3, but one is more of a study. It is downstairs." Valeria opened a door on her right. "This is the master. The closet and bathroom are through here." She opened another door that led to a huge his and hers walk-in closet, and Angela gasped in awe. "This is beautiful. The whole place is perfect." Valeria clasped her hands together and gave her a satisfied smile. "I am so glad you like it." They then checked out the guest room and laundry before going back downstairs. Brandon was too busy playing in his new room to pay attention to anything else. "Mr. Michael asked me to pick up some brochures of local schools. I put them in the junk drawer in the kitchen," Valeria said, and Angela frowned. "Junk drawer?" she asked, raising an eyebrow over the other. Valeria smiled. "The bottom drawer in the kitchen. That's my junk drawer, but feel free to change it." Angela shook her head. "No, not at all. Thank you for everything." "My pleasure, mi amor. I am just happy that Michael finally found a good woman." Angela smiled and pushed a lock of her hair behind her ear. "Do you come here often?" she asked, and Valeria shrugged. 3 times a week." "Oh." Angela did not really see the need to have a housekeeper. But at the same time, she knew that telling Valeria not to come was literally taking food out of her mouth. She was not about to do that to the woman who had broken her back turning that former bachelor pad into a home for them. "Did you need anything?" Valeria asked, and she shook her head. "No. I'm just so surprised at what you did. I already told you, mi amor, it was a pleasure." She smiled at Angela and exhaled loudly. "I have to get going." "But we just got here," Angela said, and Valeria shrugged. "I'll be back. I was only supposed to stay until you got here so that you could have someone to welcome you." Angela smiled at her as she got her purse and walked to the door. "Welcome home, Mrs. O'Brien," Valeria said again before she walked out, leaving Angela standing in the kitchen. She looked around wondering what she was supposed to do, and then it hit her. Dinner. She was going to go unpack and then make dinner for her new family. She walked to the fridge and opened it, hoping that what she saw in there was going to give her an idea of what to make. "Of course, there is nothing in the fridge," she said to no one in particular as she looked at the mostly empty shelves in the fridge save for a few boxes of Chinese takeout and pizza. "Guess the first thing on my itinerary is do some grocery shopping," she thought as she closed the fridge. Michael spent the day dodging press for most of the day because he did not feel like answering any questions that pertained to his alleged racism. and while he might have rushed his relationship with Angela for his own selfish reasons, he was not ready to answer any questions about her. He had decided that he was going to offer her the courtesy of deciding how their story was going to be told. He owed her that much. When he got back to the penthouse, he could already see the difference in being a married man. Angela had prepared a feast, and when he sat down, he found himself wondering just how much time she had spent cooking. She'd made grilled beef and served it with baked vegetable and a garden salad. It was simple but perhaps one of the most delicious meals he had ever had. After dinner, he played with Brandon for a while before Angela took him to bed. Michael was sipping on his whiskey as he always did after dinner when his phone rang. He looked at the phone and smiled when he saw Jackson's name. "Hello, doctor. Someone has been busy," he said when he picked up. "Really? You are one to talk. Last time we talked, I made a joke, and the next thing I see, you are all over the news that you eloped in Hawaii. Yeah, things kind of moved a lot faster than I anticipated." "Yeah, no kidding. Bro, seriously. Did you just do this for the publicity or are you being for real?" Jackson asked, and he got up. He exhaled deeply as he walked towards the stairwell to make sure that Angela was still out of earshot. "Well, I do really like her, JJ, that's for sure, but as for the marriage, maybe I did get into it to help me out with my problem. I am killing two birds with one stone here. I got a great woman and the world is no longer calling me a Confederate. I mean, you cannot be a racist in a blended family, can you?" he said before he sipped on his whiskey. "I guess not," Jackson said. "Well, I am pretty hurt that I did not get to be the best man, but hey, guess life happens." Michael laughed. "My ratings are all the way up right now, and the Big O is back in the running with the who's who of the fashion industry, and this time with models of all colors," he said proudly. "I did exactly what I do best. I handled my business." As Michael spoke to Jackson, he did not realize that their talk was longer than anticipated, and that Angela had heard the most incriminating details of their conversation. "Hey there, did you know that we've other hot romances like this that we want to release? But we need your help. Subscribing shows us that you're part of our journey and allows us to make more of these stories at a higher quality. So please, my queen, subscribe to the Romancely YouTube channel now. Thanks. Now back to your story."
Chapter 11. Hearing Michael say that he had only married her to get the bad press off his back and get his company rating back to where it was hurt Angela more than she could tell. She had half a mind to confront him, but at the same time, she did not want to go to him without all the facts. She ran back upstairs and went straight to her bed. She sat down and took a long deep breath. She had tried as much as she could not to get sucked into the media frenzy of what was going on with Michael. She had made that decision before she even started that roller coaster relationship with Michael. She made that decision back when he was still just her boss, and now, she was choosing to involve herself in his business because he had involved her. She bit her lip and took a long, deep breath before she searched Michael's name and company. Oh, wow. There were so many results, she felt overwhelmed. She reached for her earphones and plugged them in before she leaned back on the bed. Her eyes grew wide when she saw the many articles and videos. Michael was getting more press than Harry and Meghan, and that was not a good thing. She clicked on one of the videos and felt her heart sink when she listened to what the members had to say. This was definitely a Hail Mary marriage. That is why no one knew that he was even seeing this girl. Michael O'Brien had previously stated that he was single, and that is less than 2 months ago. And now he is hitched? To a black girl, no less? First, he marries a woman of color, and in the same week, the Big O rolls out a campaign with new models of color. Coincidence? I don't think so. She dropped the phone and leaned back on the headboard with her eyes closed. She felt a tear rolling down her cheek. Of course this was too good to be true, she thought as she brushed off the tear. I should have seen this. I should have known. Suddenly, her body and mind were no longer working together. She bolted from the bed and raced downstairs. She needed answers, and by God, she was going to have them. Her mood was written all over her face when she got to the living room. Michael had a smile on his face, but it soon disappeared when he saw the expression on her face. "What's wrong, baby?" he asked, and she shook her head. "Why did you marry me?" she asked, simply. "Why the hell would a man marry a woman he barely knows?" "I told you." "We had a connection," Michael said simply. "Really?" So it had nothing with the fact that the Big O was suddenly losing millions in revenue because no one wanted to associate with what was it they called you? "Oh yeah, a Confederate business?" Michael shook his head and got up. "Look, Angie. I know that people are not exactly saying good things about me or my business, but they are wrong. I am not racist. It never occurred to me that my human resources department were only hiring white models. You lied to me." Another tear rolled down her cheek. Michael shook his head and walked up to where she was. He held her, but she pushed him away, angry. "Do not touch me," she started before he ran his fingers through his hair. "Okay, Angie, I need you to listen to me and pay attention to what I am saying to you," he started in a voice so calm it scared her. "I did use you for publicity, but that does not mean that I am not committed to you. However, if you choose to leave, I promise you I will ruin you." She shook her head. "You wouldn't." "Try me," he said in an icy tone. "Don't forget, this is not only about you. It is about your best friend as well." Angela raised an eyebrow over the other, confused. "Candy?" she asked. "What are you talking about? I guess you have both been too busy to fill each other in on what is going on. She is one of the new models at the Big O. Do you know what bad press from the new wife of the proprietor of the business could do to her new career?" He took a step closer to Angela and gently held her face. Using his thumbs, he wiped off her tears and then stroked the side of her face. "And what about Brandon? He loved his new school and I love spending time with him. So are you just going to destabilize him so soon after he has started on his new routine?" He shook his head. "Be smart, baby. Be smart." He walked away, leaving her standing there, broken and defeated. It was like having her entire world shattered in just a few minutes. She sunk to her knees and just let the tears flow. This was her new reality. She had just seen the other side of Michael, the real Michael O'Brien, and what she hated more than anything was that he made a lot of sense. He did have a great relationship with Brandon, and getting him out of there meant confusing him. She wanted to scream. This was the most disappointing moment ever since she found out what a big mistake she had made with Brandon's father, and now, here she was in the same position with yet another man who treated her like shit. And the worst thing about her new mistake was that she had made a lifetime commitment to him. She had gone from being a woman in love to a woman surviving in her marriage, cooking and cleaning. That was what was going to keep her going. Cooking and cleaning for her son and for him too. The next few weeks were what Angela could only think was hell on earth. Knowing that she was a means to an end for Michael had felt like a knife to her heart, and what was supposed to be a home for her, a sanctuary for her and Brandon, started to feel like a prison. Leaving him became the first thing she thought about when she woke up and the last thing she thought about when she went to bed. She hated having to share a bed with a man who had maintained a lie so long just to save face with his peers. She found herself crying herself to sleep on most nights, and what enraged her even more was the fact that Michael did not even have anything to say for himself. He would come home, sit at the table as if everything was normal, and then spend some time with Brandon or even tuck him in before he retreated to his study. It would usually be for an hour or two before he went to bed. That was when Angela felt the knife in her heart being twisted and plunged deeper. He would lay next to her without saying a word, and he would not even move a muscle when he heard her sobbing in bed next to him. However, even though she was unhappy with what was the biggest decision of her life, she had noticed that her son was happier now than she had ever known him to be. He was already at his new school and he had already made some friends. The new school was a one-stop shop for parents. They catered to children of all ages, from preschool to high school, and her son had settled right in. He was looking forward to seeing his teachers and his friends, and overall, he had a great relationship with Michael. Knowing that leaving would probably break her son's heart was what made her stay. The connection she saw between Michael and Brandon could not be faked. Michael loved her boy and Brandon had warmed up to the new father figure in his life. How could she leave? How could she deny him everything she had ever wanted for him? That thought was the reason she stayed. She now understood what people in abusive marriages and relationships meant when they said that they would stay for the kids' sake. And then there was Candy, whose life had drastically changed ever since she got married. Candy loved her new life as a model, and the excitement she usually had when speaking of how much she loved her new life deterred Angela from confiding in her best friend about her discontented marriage. When she woke up on Thursday morning, she found herself thinking of the same thing. She closed her eyes and pushed the thought to the back of her mind before she pulled herself out of bed. She reached for her phone and switched off the alarm before looking at Michael's empty spot. What else is new? She wondered as she walked to the bathroom and took a quick shower. She then put on a pair of black pants and a green long-sleeved crotchet sweater before she went on to get Brandon ready for school. Her morning was relatively easy. All she had to do was drop Brandon off at school and then do some grocery shopping. But then again, every morning for her was easy since she stopped working at the store. She never thought there was a day she would miss the wild days at the store, but lately, she was missing the peace of mind that came with managing the store. After dropping her son off, she drove to the grocery store and pulled up her grocery list. Even though her new home sometimes felt like a prison of some sorts, there were a few things she had to look forward to each week, among them grocery shopping. She did not know whether it was the fact that she could now take all the food she wanted from the shelves without being concerned that the money she had would not be enough that gave her a high every time she got to the checkout station. Whatever it was, she loved being at the grocery store. She had just filled up her cart when she pushed it to the butcher's stand, her last stop at the store. "Hi, Kovac," she said to the Hungarian butcher, who always seemed to have a permanent smile on his face. "And how is my favorite homemaker today?" he asked. "Fine. Can't complain." "The usual?" She nodded. "Yes, and did you save me some salmon today?" she asked, and Kovac nodded as he reached for a tray in his refrigerated shelf. "This came in this morning from our local farmer," he said, and she smiled. "What do you say? Half a pound?" "Yes, please." Angela was never a big fan of fish, but after having salmon in Hawaii, she had developed a taste for it. She waited for Kovac to wrap up her order as she looked through her phone for a salmon dinner recipe. She had only made salmon twice and it had been a wild success, but she was looking for something different this time around. Lately, she had found that her time was best spent learning new ways of preparing food. After getting her meat, she proceeded to pay for it, and as she waited for her groceries to get bagged, she thought she saw a familiar face from the corner of her eye. And it was not just any familiar face. It was her ex, Brandon's father, but when she looked up, he was not there. She took a long, deep breath as she looked around. Could she have imagined seeing him? She had not seen him in such a long time, and she could not think of any reason why he would even cross her mind now. "Come on, Angela. Snap out of it," she thought as she pushed the cart out to the parking lot. She kept on reassuring herself that she was imagining things even when she felt uneasy in the parking lot, almost like someone was watching her. She had just put her last bag in the trunk of her car when she suddenly heard it, Deshawn's unmistakable voice. Well. If it is not Angela Carter." Startled, she turned around, dropping her keys and phone. She nearly fell over as she bent to pick up her keys and phone. "So, it is true. You did sell out," Deshawn said as she slowly backed up against the car. "What do you want, Deshawn?" she hissed, trying hard to sound confident even though her knees were begging to give way. "Where the hell is my son?" he asked, the veins on his temple showing. She could not tell if it was from years of drug abuse or if it was simply from his current mood. "So, now you are suddenly interested?" she asked angrily. "Where have you been since I told you I was pregnant? What exactly do you think has been happening for half a decade?" He moved closer and she took another step back, feeling the car behind her. She had nowhere else to go. "Is that rich white boy playing daddy with my son?" His hands were on either side of the car, making sure she could not escape. She could feel her heart beating harder and faster as he kept on shouting at her. His questions suddenly became white noise. Clearly, Deshawn was still the violent, abusive man he had always been, and as she stood there, she was increasingly aware of the imminent danger she was in. A tear rolled down her cheek as she tried pushing past him, but he was too strong for her. He barely moved, and that was when she decided to throw all caution to the wind. She kneed him in the groin and he staggered in pain, giving her just enough time to run to the driver's side. She opened the door, but before she could get in, she felt herself being pulled back and slammed against the side of the car by an angry Deshawn. She closed her eyes tightly when she saw him raising his hand and waited for the pending blow that was coming down. The world seemed to slow down because that blow never really landed. She opened her eyes when she heard a thud. She could have sworn that it was her body hitting the ground if she hadn't seen Deshawn landing on the hood of the car parked next to hers. There was a man in blue jeans and a t-shirt giving Deshawn a taste of his own medicine, dragging him like he weighed nothing. She stood there, unable to move, as she watched the man punch Deshawn's face so hard that he drew blood, and he did not stop there. He punched him in the ribs with such precision that made Angela think that he must have had some martial arts knowledge. He only stopped when Deshawn, thrown to the ground, tried getting up and failed. The man looked at Angela and then looked at Deshawn again. "This is brutality," Deshawn struggled to say. "Then call the police. I will be too happy to testify to your harassing Angela here." Angela shook her head. "What? How do you know my name?" she asked as she began to slowly back up. The man held his hands up. "Angela, my name is Jackson James. I met you at rehab that first night you met Michael, remember?" he asked, and she shook her head. "It's okay. I'm Michael's friend. Best friend. He must have told you about me." She raised an eyebrow over the other. "JJ?" she asked, and he nodded. "It's okay. Just go home." "I'll follow in my car, all right?" he asked, and she looked at Deshawn, who was still writhing in pain. "Angela, hey!" He snapped his fingers, turning her attention from Deshawn. "I need you to get in the car and drive home. Go straight home, okay? Don't make any detours." She nodded reluctantly. "And be careful. Don't speed," he said again as he opened the door for her. "I'll be right behind you in my car. The blue Prius over there." He pointed at his car parked across the lot from where her car was. She nodded and got in the car. Her hands were shaking as she secured her seatbelt. "Everything is fine." Jackson looked at Deshawn. "I fractured a rib or two. There is no way he is following without bleeding into his lungs." She nodded and started the engine before she began backing out of the lot. "Hey, buddy, I am a doctor, so trust me when I tell you that you should probably call an ambulance before you think of getting up," she heard Jackson tell Deshawn before he walked over to his car. She was breathing heavily as she drove home. It was hard for her not to simply step on the gas pedal and run every red light on the way. She kept on looking at the rearview mirror to make sure Jackson's blue Prius was still following closely. The drive back from the grocery store felt snail-like. When she finally got to the building parking lot, she could not bring herself to switch off the engine, let alone get out of the car. She just sat there, waiting to see if Jackson was still there or if she would just drive out of the building and just go somewhere else. Anywhere else. She could feel her grip loosening on the steering wheel as her palms became sweatier with every passing second. She gasped when Jackson knocked softly on her window. "It's all right. It's just me," he said in a soft voice. She switched off the engine and got out of the car, her heart still racing. She looked around before she went to her trunk and took 2 grocery bags before Jackson walked over to where she was and grabbed the other bags before following her to the elevator. She was quiet as they rode up to the penthouse. She was surprised at how she had gone from being scared to simply being numb. "Why don't you sit down? I will make you some tea," Jackson said when they got to the penthouse. Angela nodded and walked to the couch. She pulled the throw blanket over her legs as Jackson prepared the tea, thinking back to the grocery parking lot. She wondered what would have happened if she had gone to the store with Brandon. Deshaun must have had a plan. He would have probably taken him. And maybe even demand a ransom. "I hope you like chamomile," he said as he walked to the living room holding a cup of steaming tea. "Thanks." Angela tried to force a smile as she reached for the tea. "This place sure does look different," Jackson said as he looked around. "I guess it has been a while since I was here." She took a sip of her tea. "I was just as surprised. I came here for dinner and the next week when I came back the place was entirely different." She ran a hand on the couch and smiled up at him. It was the first genuine smile of the day. "I like it though. It is warm. It looks and feels like home." Jackson forced out a laugh. Michael O'Brien all settled down. He shook his head. "I never thought I would see the day. I guess he was just waiting for you." Angela shook her head and pushed a curly strand back. "Really?" she said in a sarcastic tone. "Because I heard him on the phone saying that he only married me to beat the racism charges that were crippling his business." Jackson exhaled loudly. "You heard about that, huh?" She shrugged. "I did not only hear about it, I asked him and—" Her voice trailed off when her eyes welled up again. She leaned back and took another sip of her tea. "Angie, listen. I know that your relationship started a little rocky and maybe Michael benefited from the publicity about your marriage, but you know, I have known him all my life and when he was talking about you, it was the first time in a long time that I saw him genuinely happy. He has always met girls who stay with him because for them, he was just a means to an end." "Kind of like the way I was?" she asked, and he shrugged. "I know, this looks bad and I will not play devil's advocate here. What Michael did was wrong, but I can swear on my life that he loves you and I know it just kills him knowing that he cannot be the man, the husband you deserve." She shook her head and Jackson leaned in. "Listen, tell me something, has he ever failed to come home?" "Ever?" he asked, and she shook her head. "No, he always comes home. Even though it has been kind of a Cold War situation between us." He looked at her and raised an eyebrow. He could very easily get a hotel or ask his realtor to get him a new place, but instead, he always comes home. "To you." Angela bit her lower lip and held her cup in her hands. "It is going to get better. I promise you. For now, just keep doing what you are doing," he said. "Be patient with him, okay?" She nodded reluctantly and he smiled. "Thanks for being there today. I don't know what Deshaun would have done if you were not there." He smiled. "It was a pleasure, really. I never really get real-life SOBs to practice my MMA skills. So, I was right when I thought you had MMA precision in the way you handled him. He shrugged. I don't get much time to work out the way I would like, but I make it a point to get as much practice as I can. Yeah, it shows, Angela said, sipping on her tea. Who was he? The man in the parking lot? Jackson asked, and she exhaled loudly. My ex Deshawn. Things didn't end so well with him, and for some reason, now he is asking about Brandon like he has always been this present father. She rubbed her temple and rolled her eyes. I honestly have no idea what that was all about. How did he know you were going to be there? Jackson asked. Did he maybe follow you there? Angela thought for a moment and shook her head. No, I think it was purely coincidental. But I would never want it to happen again. Do you know what I mean? He nodded. Of course, of course. Just relax. I will talk to Michael and a lawyer friend of ours to sort out a restraining order, he said just as his pager went off. Damn. That is the hospital. I have to get going. You're a doctor? Angela asked, surprised. No wonder I have never met you. Yeah, I'm on my last year of my internship. Technically, last month. I start my residency in a few weeks. Angela could tell by the tone of his voice that he was proud of himself. Maybe we can get some time to know each other better over dinner sometime? I can invite Candy, she's my best friend. It will be a best friend meet and greet, so to speak, she said as he stood up. Sounds like a plan. He leaned in and put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Now, have some more tea and just relax, okay? She smiled as he rushed to the door and waited before he was out of the penthouse before she sipped on her tea. She felt a lot more relaxed after talking to Jackson, and as she soon realized, she had a whole new outlook to her marriage as well.
Chapter 12. After putting Brandon to bed, Angela went back downstairs and switched on the TV. She was not really watching whatever was on, but the TV provided a perfect background noise as she waited for Michael to come home. He had sent her a text saying that he would not be home for dinner, but he had not said what time he would be back. He was usually back by 5 or 8 if and when he got late, but on that particular day he was later than usual. She did not even realize when she fell asleep on the couch waiting for him. The last thing she remembered was watching Top Chef when she suddenly woke up to a loud noise. It sounded almost like a thud. She pulled herself up from the couch, just in time to see her husband struggling to get up. Michael! She got off the couch and rushed to where he was. He was blabbering and reeked of alcohol. Damn it, baby, what did you do? She wondered out loud as she helped him to his feet. She began guiding her to the couch, but she did not want to let him crash there. The last thing she wanted was to have Brandon wake up in the morning and see him in his drunken state. Come on, big guy. She was heaving as she helped him to the guest room. It felt like she had done a 10-kilometer marathon by the time they finally got to the guest room. He fell on the bed and she lay next to him for a few minutes before she began helping him with his clothes. From the way his clothes smelled, she couldn't help but wonder if someone had spilled their drink on him, or if he had been too drunk to hold his own drink steady. Okay, we are finally done, she said as she draped a comforter on him. Getting him undressed had taken almost 20 minutes and she was exhausted. She was about to leave when she heard him call her name. She turned around and looked at him. His eyes were still closed, but he was saying something. His voice was so low, she had to crawl next to him just so she could hear what he was saying. Angie, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have been there for you. I should have been there when that man attacked you. Michael, she said in a soft voice in an attempt to try and calm him down, but he would not stop. You really do care for me, and I have been so tough on you. He went on, and she began running her fingers through his hair, gently rubbing her fingertips against his scalp. When he finally got silent, she pulled away, but he reached for her hand and touched it ever so lightly. Don't leave me, Angie. Please, he begged. She looked at him and crawled back into bed next to him. She went on running her fingers through his hair until he fell asleep, which was just minutes before she too fell asleep. When she woke up the next morning, she felt like she had been sleeping for ages. She reached for her phone on the nightstand, and when she did not feel the nightstand where she usually had it, it suddenly hit her. She was not in the master bedroom. Shit! She was late getting Brandon ready for school. She jolted out of bed and looked at the empty bed next to her. Michael could have at least woken me up, she thought as she ran out of the guest room. She stopped at the dining table when she saw a piece of folded paper with her name on it. Angie, I didn't want to wake you up because I know you had to stay up late last night because of me. Valeria took Brandon to school. I explained to him that you were not feeling so well. I'll see you tonight. She exhaled loudly and walked to the couch. That was the last place she had seen her phone. She sat down and pulled up Candy's number before she started typing. Hey, feel like hanging out? It only took a few minutes before Candy texted back. Slow day today, so sure. I'll drop by when I am done with this shoot. Angela frowned. A shoot? It is only 9. She leaned back and waited for the reply. Something about the way the lighting is during the sunrise. Photography jargon. Almost done. See you soon. Angela smiled and typed a quick see you soon before she made her way upstairs. She took a quick shower before making her way back downstairs for some breakfast. She was not really in the mood for cooking, so she just got coffee started and had a bowl of cold cereal. And true to her word, Candy got there before she was even done with her breakfast. Is there a day you will come to see me without food? Angela asked when she opened the door for Candy, who was holding a pizza box. What? So, now you are too good for pizza? Candy asked, and Angela frowned. I will never be too good for pizza. So, which pizza did you get? Spicy meat lovers special, and because it is just us. Thin crust, Candy said excitedly as they walked to the living room. Sheer perfection, Angela said as they sat down. How was the shoot? Why the hell did they do it so early? I don't get the timing either, but they were hell-bent on getting that morning glow, which was great for the swimsuit line they are planning on releasing. You know how it goes. She reached for a slice and leaned back. The advantage is that my day is done. I have the whole day, and here I was thinking that dancing gave me some kind of freedom. Angela smiled as she reached for her own slice. So what about things on the boyfriend front? How is that going? She asked, and Candy paused. I don't really know. Angela shook her head. What are you talking about? I thought you said that things were heating up with you and that photographer. Candy rolled her eyes. Yeah, Franco. She shook her head. I am a little concerned at how fast he jumped the gun. I mean, this is a tough industry. I know that much. But he is a photographer who sees new girls every single day. She took a bite and shrugged. How long is it going to be before he sees the next pretty thing and leaves me high and dry? Angela shrugged. I don't know. He might be different. Yeah, that's why we see 50-year-old photographers with 21-year-old wives. Candy shook her head. I would rather get myself a man who hardly speaks a word of English, and I only have one deal breaker. He cannot be in the fashion industry. Angela laughed. But I am really happy to be in this new career, Candy went on. A few more years of this, and I can finally get my own store. Angela took another bite of her slice. I'm really glad you're happy, hun, she said, smiling at her best friend. What about you, Mrs. O'Brien? How do you like your new life? Candy asked, and for a moment, Angela wanted to tell her everything. But after seeing her so happy, she could not bear to say anything negative. I'm on the road to be a proper Stepford wife, I guess, she said, laughing. After meeting some of the parents at the school who are all about vegan, gluten-free, and sugar-free food, I am not looking forward to the day I have to take my store-bought cupcakes. Candy laughed. Yes, girl. Be true to your gluten lifestyle, she said, pumping her fist in the air. Michael had been feeling like he had failed Angela ever since his best friend told him of the incident at the grocery store parking lot. He had already taken all the measures to make sure Deshaun Willis wouldn't bother his family again, but that incident was just the latest insult to the injury that was his being a lousy husband. He had tried drinking away his sorrows, but once he woke up in the morning, he still had the memories of his failures and a killer hangover. He felt even guiltier when he woke up next to her to find that she had cleaned him up and put him to bed, and after the way he had treated her. He wondered what he had done to deserve someone so good, someone so genuine. As if the guilt that was eating at him wasn't enough, he also had to deal with the fact that his plan had not worked as well as he would have wanted it to. Yes, his company was back to its former glory, but the racism scandal had cost him the gig he had been working so hard to get into. He had just got the news that the Big O would not be showcasing their pieces in the private fashion show earlier that day, and he had spent the better part of the day trying to come to terms with the news. He was trying to figure out what he could do to stay in the office longer, but he somehow found himself driving home. "What are you doing, Michael?" he wondered as he rubbed his temple. "What the hell are you doing ruining the best thing that ever happened to you?" He took a long deep breath and got out of his car before he walked to the elevator. He could feel his heart racing as he rode to the penthouse, and his mind was going crazy. The house was unusually silent when he got in, and as usual, the place smelled delicious. He walked to the kitchen where he found Angela plating dinner. "Hi," he said in a soft voice. She looked with a forced smile. "Hi. The house is a little quiet today. Where's Brandon?" he asked. Candy took him out for ice cream. He nodded and looked at the food. It looked good, heck, perfect even, but he could not bring himself to say the words. He ate in silence before he got up and put his dirty plate in the dishwasher. He walked up to the master bedroom and began undressing when he heard footsteps, Angela's footsteps growing closer and closer. "Michael, we need to talk," she said in a soft voice, and he turned around to look at her. "Angie, I really can't talk right now. It's been a long day." "Well, it's been a long couple of weeks for me too, and last night, you opened up to me. Why is it that you won't even look at me today?" she asked as she walked into the bedroom. He looked at her, and that was when he saw it, how beautiful she looked. She was wearing a black low-cut sleeveless maxi dress that looked perfect on her curvy body. Her hair was held up in a curly bun with a few stray curly strands framing her face. He looked at her and shook his head. "Baby, I have had a day from hell." He started, and he noticed an ever-so-slight shudder as she bit her lower lip. What is it? What happened?" She shook her head and shrugged. "Nothing. It is just that you haven't called me baby in a while." Michael felt the guilt pit in his heart grow even bigger as he sat down on the edge of the bed. She slowly walked up to the bed and sat down on the other side of the bed. "I have been a jerk to you, Angie, and I chose to prioritize my company over your happiness." He turned around and looked at her. "I should have never used you as a PR stunt, but then again, I am not sorry that I asked you to marry me or that I went ahead with it, because honestly, you have been the one positive to come out of this whole thing. You and Brandon. I love you. Both of you." He looked at her and reached for her hand. She gasped when his fingers brushed against her hand lightly. He moved closer to her and touched her chin before turning her face so that he could look into her eyes. He could tell by the faded glory of her cheeks that she had spent most of her days crying, just as she did on most nights next to him, and yet he did not even comfort her. He stroked her cheek gently before he sunk to his knees. "What are you doing?" she asked as she looked down at him. "Forgive me," he said in a whisper. He had his arms around her and his head against her tummy. "This is not the kind of man I ever wanted to be. I don't know why." He realized that he did not have any words that would sound perfect. So, he just looked up at her. "Please forgive me, Angie." "Michael, stop. Please," she said as she put her hand on his shoulder. He pulled her hand from his shoulder and brought it to his lips. "You did not take it off," he said in a whisper, and she shook her head. "I did not. I guess I somehow believed that we were going to work everything out," she said in a soft voice, and at that moment, Michael knew that there was no way he could ever love her more. He pulled himself up and held the back of her neck before he claimed her lips in one long.
Oh no, another love scene had to be taken out due to YouTube's policies. If you haven't already, join the Romance Audiobook Insiders for free to learn how to get love scenes in future. Link to join is in the description. Pause this and do that. It's okay, I'll wait. Signed up for free? Good, now back to the story.
They looked at each other as they tried to catch their breath. Engagement ring, he said as he looked at her, and she frowned. What? An engagement ring? That is what I should get you, seeing as I never really ever got you one, he said. She smiled and shrugged. I wouldn't say no to jewelry. You know what they say about diamonds. He leaned forward and kissed her. It would make a good apology gift too, he said when he pulled away, and she nodded. You know what would make a good gift? Tell me anything, whatever you want. Take me to Vermont, she said. Let us just leave the city for a few days. He reached for her face and pushed a curly strand behind her ear. Will that make you happy? She nodded. More than you could ever know, she said, and he nodded. Okay, we can leave tomorrow. She smiled and bit her lip. You know, every time you bite your lip, all I can think about is fucking you. Angela giggled. Why don't we just let you recover first? He got closer to her and draped an arm around her. I love you so much, Angela. I can't believe that I almost lost everything. He planted a gentle kiss on her forehead. I promise to always try and live up to my vows, because I meant every word I said on that beach. Every single last word. Angela looked into his eyes, and as they lay there, she saw him. The man she had fallen for. The man she had married. He had finally come back to her. I love you, she whispered. I am in love with you. And it freaks me out because you don't even know my birthday or my middle name. June 20th, that's my birthday, he said. And I have no middle name. She smiled and held his cheek. Christine, my middle name, and September 9th is my birthday, she said. He raised an eyebrow over the other. Christine? 2 first names. Yeah, my aunt told me that originally. My mum wanted me to be Angel Christine or Angel Christie. But she wasn't the one who filled the paperwork, so here I am. He smiled and leaned in to kiss her again. I don't care if your name is Christine. It's beautiful and I love it because I love you. He pulled her even closer and pushed her dress off her shoulder. Now, let's see if we can get started on Vermont right here. She gasped when she felt his already hard cock pressing into her thigh. They were both eager to make up for lost time, and they were both loving the process. Every marriage might have had its ups and downs, but as they found out, it was how they came out the other side that determined if they made it or not, and as far as Michael and Angela were concerned, they were succeeding so far. The end. If you want more BWWM romances like this, please, my love, be sure to subscribe to the Romancely YouTube channel. I look forward to spending more time with you. Subscribe and let's make it happen.